Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku awakened Joestar Bloodline? Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Izuku Joestar, the will of a hero and the power within by the Ultimate One. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Izuku sighed. Life was always like this. It was bland, not in a garbage way, but in a not interesting and boring way. Well, that was a lie. Life was indeed shit for him. He is just 13 years old, and he is working a part-time job to pay the bills. On top of that, he is still in school. Life was stressful all the time, but he had to push through. There was no other choice. His full name was Izuku Midoriya. He is 13 years old and has always wanted to be a hero. He looked outside at the moon, watching a few heroes on patrol. He was quirkless, as far as he knew, anyway. The only thing that made him stand out was a purple star on his upper left shoulder. It never did anything but was like a tattoo, and it apparently had been there since he was born. He must have gotten it from one of his parents. Whoever they were, he wasn't even sure if that star on his shoulder was part of his quirk or not. It didn't matter. He was dropped off at an orphanage a little over 13 years ago when he was a few days old. He didn't know why it happened, but the adults at the orphanage said it was because his parents didn't want me. It said so on the note that was left with him in that basket, which was left outside that door. Izuku sat there, eyes fixed on the night sky. It was midnight, and most nights he had to take the evening shift. He wondered, as he always did, if there was more to life than what he knew. The constant grind of school, work, and the empty silence of his room after the day's long hours, nothing ever seemed to change. It was as if the world was constantly moving forward while he was stuck in place. He sighed again, feeling the weight of it all press down on him. 13 years old and already shouldering so much responsibility. The orphanage, while kind, had never been the home he imagined. The caretakers, though well-meaning, were overwhelmed with the other kids, and Izuku had always been an outcast. When you are the only quirkless child at the orphanage, you are forgotten after a bit. The parents saw him as someone who wasn't worthy of being chosen. He moved out of there a few months ago, around his 13th birthday, and he has been running it solo ever since. Despite the circumstances, Izuku held on to his dream of becoming a hero. Every day, he worked hard, kept his head down, and did what was expected of him. His job at the local convenience store was grueling. Stocking shelves, cleaning up after customers, ringing up items. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but it was the only way he could pay for the basics. His classmates didn't know about his part-time job, though, and he liked it that way. He didn't want to be seen as different, though in his heart, he knew he was. Not just because he was orphaned or because he worked a job like an adult, but because of the constant reminder of his quirkless status. The bell rang at the front of the store, and Izuku stood up straight. Something that was weird about him being 13 was that he was 6 feet tall. Not unusual, but it is weird for someone who was quirkless anyway. He had a somewhat solid frame, but not super muscular. He had nice green hair flowing from his head. Sometimes people thought he was older, and funny enough helped him get this job, but the owner knew his real age. "Welcome to Toki's. Let me know if you need any help," he said with a gentle smile. A man shuffled in, hunched with age, his graying hair a contrast to the fresh evening air. He wore a worn-out coat, the kind that looked like it had seen better days, and his steps were slow, deliberate, as though he were savoring the last moments of warmth before stepping back into the cold. Izuku instinctively straightened up, offering the man a warm, if slightly weary, smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Toki's. Let me know if you need any help," Izuku said, his voice gentle. The old man nodded but didn't immediately respond. He moved slowly through the aisles, his hands lightly brushing against the shelves, searching for something with careful deliberation. It wasn't unusual for people to come in and wander about, but this man seemed different, as if he had a purpose beyond just picking up a few snacks or supplies. Izuku returned to his task of stocking the shelves, but his mind wandered. There were times when he felt like he was invisible, like he was just another cog in the machine that kept the world turning. But there were also moments when someone would look at him, really look at him, and for a brief second, he could almost convince himself that he mattered. Tonight, the old man seemed to be one of those rare moments. He caught sight of the old man again as he moved toward the back of the store. His gait was slower now, and he appeared to be struggling, though not in a way that would immediately demand help. Izuku hesitated for a moment, his mind racing with the thought of whether to intervene. The man had already made his way this far on his own. Maybe he was just fine, maybe this was just the way he walked. But before he could think too long on it, the old man suddenly stopped. He stood still for a moment, a puzzled expression crossing his face as he stared at the shelves, the options seemingly overwhelming him. Izuku saw his chance to be helpful. Setting down the box of canned goods in his hand, he walked toward the man, his steps light but purposeful. "Excuse me, sir, can I help you find something?" The old man turned to face him, his eyes squinting slightly, as though trying to see more clearly. "Ah, yes," the man rasped, his voice rough with age. "I'm looking for some tea. Not just any tea, mind you. The special kind, the one that helps me sleep at night." Izuku nodded immediately, recognizing the type of tea the man meant. He had seen it on the top shelf, a soothing blend of chamomile and lavender that was known to calm the mind and aid in sleep. It was one of the store's more expensive items, but it was popular with the elderly. "Right this way," Izuku said, gesturing toward the back corner of the store. He led the man carefully, guiding him around the aisles, making sure to give him enough space to move freely. As they reached the shelf with the tea, the old man slowly extended his hand, but his eyes seemed distant, unsure. He reached for a box, his hand trembling slightly, and it was then that Izuku noticed something else. The old man's fingers were worn, calloused, and a few of them had a slight tremor, as though age, or something else, was catching up with him. Izuku carefully took the box from the man's hand before he could drop it. "Here you go," he said gently, offering it with both hands. "I'll ring it up for you at the front." The old man looked at him for a long moment, his face softening. "Thank you, young man," he said, his voice low but filled with appreciation. "I don't get help from people often, not anymore. Used to be a time when I was the one doing the helping." Izuku smiled, though it felt bittersweet. He could relate, in a way. He, too, had spent much of his life trying to be strong, trying to get by on his own. But it didn't always work that way, and sometimes, it felt like the weight of the world was just a little too much for one person to carry alone. "I understand," Izuku replied quietly. "But it's no trouble. I'm happy to help." The old man nodded, his eyes softening further. "You've got a good heart, kid. That's rare these days. Don't lose it." As they made their way to the front of the store, Izuku carefully scanned the box of tea, bagging it up as the man reached for his wallet. The exchange was quiet, and Izuku made sure to count the change slowly, ensuring that the man didn't rush through the process. "Here's your change, sir," Izuku said, handing him the coins. The old man took the change with a nod, then lingered for a moment, as if unsure of whether to say anything more. Finally, he spoke again. "You remind me of myself, back when I was younger. I had dreams, too. Big ones. But the world, it doesn't always let us follow them, does it?" Izuku paused, his heart tightening at the words. He wanted to say something encouraging, something that might lift the man's spirits. But the truth was, he didn't have all the answers. He was still searching for them himself. "No," Izuku said softly. "It doesn't always. But that doesn't mean we give up, right?" The old man chuckled, a raspy but genuine sound. "Right. You've got the right idea, kid." With a final nod, the old man turned and shuffled out of the store, the doorbell ringing softly behind him. Izuku stood there for a moment, staring at the door, his mind swirling with thoughts. He wasn't sure if the old man had given him advice or just shared a piece of his past, but it didn't matter. There was something comforting about the interaction, something that made Izuku feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this world. "Hey, kid," Toki said, his gravelly voice breaking through the quiet as he walked in from the back room. The man was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged look that matched his tough exterior. His quirk had left him with 4 horns protruding from his head, each one like a jagged reminder of the mutation that marked him in a world where quirks were everything. Despite the quirks, though, Toki was one of the few who had taken to the grueling life of a store owner, never asking for pity or sympathy. Izuku straightened up, turning to face him with a polite smile. "Oh, hey, Toki. You're early tonight." Toki chuckled, his rough voice resonating as he shifted his weight onto the counter. "Not much else to do around here, kid. And you're still working hard, huh? You're a trooper." Izuku nodded, not wanting to dwell on it too much. "I've got to keep at it. The bills don't pay themselves." He tried to make it sound casual, though deep down, the weight of it all always felt a little heavier each day. He looked over at Toki, who was eyeing him with a knowing expression. Toki rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then added, "You know, you don't have to do all this alone. You're young, you should be focusing on school and, well, your future, not just paying bills." Izuku shifted uncomfortably at the comment. "It's fine. I've got it under control." "Well, all right, kid," he said, looking at the clock. "It is 3:52 a.m., so why don't you go home and rest for a bit before you got to go to school in a few hours, and oh," he said, walking over with his paycheck for the week. "Here is your money and a little extra for the overtime and hard work," he said, setting it in his hand. Izuku looked down at the paycheck in his hand, the weight of it feeling more like a reminder of how much he had to push himself to get by than a reward for his hard work. He could feel the exhaustion in his bones, the way his muscles ached from standing for hours and moving heavy boxes. But he didn't want to admit it to anyone, not even to Toki, who probably understood more than he let on. "Thanks, Toki," Izuku said, tucking the paycheck into his jacket pocket. He didn't need the extra attention, and though he appreciated the gesture, it felt strange to be singled out for doing something he had to do. "I'll take the rest when I finish my shift tonight." Toki raised an eyebrow. "Izuku, you've been working non-stop for weeks. Go home, get some sleep. You can't keep running on fumes forever." Izuku nodded but didn't argue. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice tinged with fatigue. "I'm used to it, thank you, though, sir." "No problem, kid, now get out of here and chill out for a bit," he said, shooing him away. Izuku hesitated for a moment, still standing behind the counter, looking at the clock. It was 3:55 a.m. His eyes wandered over to the window, where the faint light of the early morning began to creep in. He had a few hours before school started, but that never seemed like enough time to rest properly. Still, Toki was right. He had been pushing himself too hard lately, and even though it felt wrong to leave early, he knew his body needed the break. With a reluctant sigh, he pulled his jacket tighter around himself and nodded toward Toki. "All right, I'll head out. Thanks again, Toki." The store owner just gave him a casual wave, his horns shifting slightly with the motion. "Anytime, kid. Take care of yourself, all right." Izuku gave a small smile, grateful for the concern, though he didn't voice the overwhelming exhaustion he felt. He grabbed his things and headed out of the store, the cool night air hitting him as soon as he stepped outside. The streets were quiet, the city still deep in slumber as the sun was only beginning to rise. It was a peaceful sight, but for Izuku, it felt as though the world was always moving faster than he could keep up with. He started walking home, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The walk was long, but it gave him time to think. He didn't have a home that felt like a true home. The orphanage, even after he had left it, still lingered in his mind. It was like a faded photograph of a place he could never truly return to, not that he wanted to. He had left because there wasn't much for him there, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that followed him like a shadow. His thoughts drifted back to the old man at the store. The man's words about dreams and the world not letting them come true. Izuku couldn't help but feel a pang of truth in those words. He had dreams, too, ones that seemed impossible to achieve. Becoming a hero, like all the ones he watched on patrol, felt like something that was beyond his grasp. He was quirkless, just a regular kid with nothing extraordinary about him. There were times when he didn't know how much longer he could hold on to that dream, especially when he was forced to work so hard just to survive. As he passed a dark alleyway, Izuku's eyes caught a glimpse of something shiny, a reflection from a piece of glass. He stepped closer, instinctively reaching out to touch it. When he did, his fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, and he looked down to find a broken pocket watch lying on the ground. He bent down to pick it up, examining the intricate design on the back. It seemed old, much older than anything he'd seen before. Izuku turned the watch over in his hands, trying to find a clue about who it belonged to, but there was nothing, just a faded engraving he couldn't quite make out. He stared at it for a moment, wondering what kind of person would leave something like this behind. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe the universe was telling him that there was still something out there for him. That he wasn't truly alone, even if he sometimes felt like it. He slipped the watch into his jacket pocket, deciding to take it with him. It might not have meant anything, but the small gesture of finding something that wasn't his reminded him that there were still mysteries in the world. And maybe, just maybe, there was still something waiting for him. By the time Izuku reached his small apartment, the sky was turning a pale blue, signaling the coming dawn. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the silence of his empty room. It wasn't much, just a small bed in the corner, a desk cluttered with books and papers, and a single chair by the window. It was all he needed, though, and that was enough for now. It might have been small, and the paint was cracking around the walls of the place, but it was cheap and it was good. He threw his bag onto the floor and went to the bathroom to wash his face. The cold water helped wake him up, though he still felt the weight of exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror and saw the dark circles under his eyes, a reminder of how little sleep he'd been getting. But he couldn't afford to think about that now. He had to get to school, and then after that, he would go back to the store to work. He still got 6 hours of sleep a day, but that wasn't good by any means. But he was a fighter, and he would push. 4 hours later, Izuku walked into the classroom, his tired eyes scanning the desks for an empty seat. He didn't even have the energy to be annoyed when he saw Bakugo already sitting near the back, his usual scowl plastered on his face. Izuku gave a small sigh, knowing it was just a matter of time before the inevitable would happen. He shuffled to an empty desk by the window and sat down, pulling out his textbook and trying to focus on the lesson that would be starting soon. His head was pounding, his eyelids heavy as he tried to push through the fog of exhaustion. He didn't have the luxury of falling asleep in class, not with the kind of work he had ahead of him. "Oi, Deku," Bakugo's voice rang out, sharper than usual. Izuku didn't even flinch, already knowing what was coming. "What, are you too tired to even sit up straight today?" Bakugo's tone was always loud, but today it had an edge to it, like he was looking for a fight. Izuku didn't respond immediately, keeping his eyes on his book. He didn't need this right now. He'd barely gotten any sleep, and his head was still spinning from the restless night. Bakugo had always found ways to push his buttons, but today, it felt like everything was getting to him all at once. "Are you ignoring me now, you damn nerd?" Bakugo growled from the back of the room. "I'm not ignoring you," Izuku said quietly, his voice tired but calm. "Why do you have to be like this anyway?" "All right, fine, I'll be nice for a bit," he said grumpily. It was always like this ever since they were kids, anyway. He told him he wanted to be a hero without a quirk, and then it's like, boom. Sometimes literally with Bakugo and his explosions, and it's like he has been a pain in the ass ever since. He would ignore him most of the time, and he would stop, but it never did for a long time. It always looked weird, too, because he is 6 feet tall while Bakugo was a lot shorter. It looked like a Great Dane being barked at by a Chihuahua. Izuku stared at his textbook, trying to focus on the lesson despite the fatigue clouding his thoughts. The classroom was dim, and the drone of the teacher's voice felt like a distant hum in the background. His eyes were heavy, the exhaustion weighing him down, but he forced himself to pay attention. The test coming up was going to be brutal, and he couldn't afford to fall behind. "Not again." "Oi, Deku," Bakugo's voice rang out once more, this time a little more subdued, but still carrying the same sharp edge. Izuku didn't flinch this time. He was too tired for it. "Yeah," Izuku responded quietly, not looking up from his book. He didn't have the energy to engage in another round of Bakugo's teasing or insults. If anything, he was trying to hold it together. Just another few hours until he could escape to work and focus on something that would help him get by. "You're really gonna just sit there all class like some zombie?" Bakugo's voice came again, a little softer, but still tinged with something that could have been concern, maybe even frustration. It was a strange sound from Bakugo, one that Izuku wasn't quite sure how to process. "I'm fine," Izuku mumbled, rubbing his eyes in a futile attempt to stave off the growing fatigue. "I just need to make it through the day." Bakugo scoffed but said nothing more, clearly not believing it. Instead, he fell silent, his usual scowl returning as he leaned back in his seat, probably bored and annoyed by the lack of a reaction. As the lesson droned on, Izuku tried his best to keep up, jotting down notes even though they made no sense to him in his current state. He could feel the heaviness in his limbs, the dull ache in his head that was like a constant presence, and the gnawing hunger in his stomach that had been building ever since he left the store this morning. There was nothing left to give. But that's what kept him going, didn't it? The idea that there was no choice but to keep moving, no matter how much his body screamed for rest. The bell eventually rang, signaling the end of the class, and Izuku was on autopilot as he gathered his things. He didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even to Bakugo, who was already out of his seat and heading toward the door. Izuku didn't care, he just needed to get to home. He had no time to think about anything else. Hours later, Izuku stepped into the dimly lit convenience store, the familiar scent of cleaning products and cheap coffee filling his nose. It was a small, quiet place, tucked away on the outskirts of town, and the night shift had always been the easiest for him. Toki was already behind the counter, sorting through the small stack of delivery boxes that had arrived earlier in the day. "Hey, Izuku," Toki called out as he spotted him entering. Toki had always been the cheerful one of the two, his broad smile and easygoing nature helping to lighten the long, dreary hours they spent working at the store. "How was school? You look like you could use some sleep." "Don't worry, sir, I got 6.5 hours of sleep today, so I'm good for now," he said. Toki raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying the half-hearted joke. 6.5 hours, huh? He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms as he gave Izuku a skeptical look. "Well, you're definitely looking a little rough. I don't know how you manage to keep going on that little sleep. I'd be a mess by now." Izuku smiled weakly, brushing a hand through his messy hair. "I've gotten used to it, I guess. I just need to push through the day." His voice was quiet, and despite his attempt at brushing it off, Toki could see the strain in his eyes. Well, just don't burn yourself out. I've seen how you work yourself to the bone. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion, right?" Toki's tone was gentle, but there was an underlying concern there, one Izuku could feel. Izuku nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He appreciated Toki's concern, really, but it wasn't like he had much of a choice. Bills didn't pay themselves, and the dream of becoming a hero without a quirk was something he couldn't give up on. So, for now, he would push through, because there wasn't another way. He grabbed his work shirt from the hook behind the counter and quickly changed. As he was pulling on the familiar uniform, he glanced at the clock. The shift would likely be a slow one, but that didn't mean it would be easy. The night shift always had its own challenges, most of which were mental. The silence of the store, the hours dragging by slowly, and the constant hum of the refrigerators in the back could all make it harder to keep focused. Izuku took a deep breath and walked over to the counter where Toki was now scanning a few items from the boxes. "Anything to do tonight?" Izuku asked, trying to sound more upbeat than he felt. Toki shrugged. "Same old stuff. Stocking shelves, cleaning, maybe a few customers. Just the usual. But hey, you've been through worse, right?" Izuku gave a small smile at Toki's attempt to lighten the mood. "Yeah, worse, not that I can remember it right now. It's only 11:48 right now, so we should be fine," he said, shrugging. "Yeah, how was school today?" he asked, scratching one of his horns. "Honestly good. Just a bit annoying with my classmates, but hey, that is life. I always like learning, though," he said shortly after adjusting his shirt. "Good. You can put that brain of yours to use with those hero journals you have," Toki said, chuckling. "All the strengths and weaknesses you've got on every hero. You're like a walking encyclopedia of heroes." Izuku let out a small laugh, but it was faint, tired. "I'll get there someday," he replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. Toki gave him a knowing look, clearly understanding the passion that burned in Izuku's eyes. "You've got the drive, that's for sure. I believe in you, kid." You're gonna make it. There was a brief silence before Izuku asked, "How's your wife doing?" "She's still sick, right?" Toki sighed and leaned against the counter, looking tired himself. "Yeah, she's still not feeling great. But she should be in tomorrow. Hopefully, she's better by then." He gave Izuku a half smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "She's a tough one, though. She'll push through." Izuku gave a small nod of sympathy. "Tell her I hope she feels better soon." "Thanks, I will," Toki said, his tone sincere, as he returned to scanning the new deliveries. The sudden chime of the bell at the front of the store made both of them glance up in surprise. Toki raised an eyebrow, looking confused. "Who the heck is at the counter this late anyway?" he muttered as he stood up straight. Izuku turned toward the front, and his curiosity piqued. "I don't know, but sometimes people do wander late." He trailed off, eyeing the door as a figure appeared in the dimly lit entrance. "Yeah, but it's so late. Who needs something from a convenience store at this hour?" Toki mumbled, but then added more to himself, "Then again, sometimes this happens." Izuku walked to the front, his steps quiet as he prepared to greet the late-night customer. Izuku turned the corner with a smile. "How can I help you today?" he asked the woman calmly. Izuku's greeting died in his throat when he saw the woman standing in front of the counter. She looked to be in her late 20s, dressed in a casual but stylish outfit, soft, loose sweater paired with jeans and boots, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Her eyes were a deep shade of brown, and she held a small, nervous smile on her face. "I need help finding something," she said, her voice a little quieter than expected. She hesitated for a brief moment before continuing, "Condoms." Izuku's eyes went wide, and his face immediately turned bright red. His heart raced, and he felt a heat rising to his cheeks that he couldn't stop. For a second, his mind blanked entirely. He had been prepared to help with anything, canned goods, snacks, drinks, but this was not on the list of things he had anticipated. Conned, Izuku stammered, his voice trembling as he struggled to form words. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself, but it didn't help. "I mean, he's 13, you can't blame him. See, can you say that again?" The woman gave him a small, apologetic smile, clearly noticing his discomfort. "I need to find some condoms, do you know where they are?" she asked, her voice softening just a little. "I'm kind of in a hurry." Izuku nodded quickly, his face burning, trying his best not to show just how flustered he was. "All right, of course." He quickly pointed toward the back corner of the store, his hand shaking slightly. "Aisle 3. It's near the health section." The woman smiled again, though it was a bit more amused this time, as if she could sense his discomfort. "Thanks so much," she said, her voice laced with humor that made Izuku blush even harder. I'll just wait here," Izuku mumbled, trying to act professional although his entire body was burning with embarrassment. His heart was still pounding in his chest, and he had to take a deep breath to calm himself before he could manage to walk back to the counter. As the woman walked off toward the aisle, Izuku turned back to Toki, who was standing at the counter with a big grin on his face. "What's going on there, Izuku? You look like you just saw a ghost," Toki teased, barely holding back a chuckle. His eyes twinkled with mischief, clearly enjoying the moment far too much. "Nothing, sir," he said, rounding around the corner. "I just forget from time to time that people buy for late-night activities is all," he said, reorganizing one of the shelves in front. Izuku tried his best to focus on the shelf in front of him, but his mind kept wandering back to the awkward interaction. He could still feel his face burning from the encounter, and he silently wished that time would speed up so he could just forget it. The hum of the refrigerator behind him was the only sound that filled the space as he tried to distract himself by adjusting a box of snacks. A few moments later, the woman returned, holding a small box of condoms in one hand and a few other items in her other. Izuku stood up straight, trying to compose himself as he turned toward the counter. He cleared his throat again, doing his best to regain his professionalism. The woman approached the counter with a smile that made Izuku's stomach do a flip. It was an amused smile, one that hinted she was still enjoying his flustered state. "I'm sorry about earlier," she said, her tone light. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Izuku, still trying to act composed, managed a small smile. It's okay. It's just, not something I'm used to, that's all, he said, his voice shaky but steadying as he spoke. The woman giggled softly, clearly not bothered by his discomfort. You were really cute, though, getting all flustered. I hope you weren't too embarrassed. She placed the box of condoms and the other items on the counter. Izuku's cheeks flushed even deeper, and he quickly glanced at Toki for some sort of relief, but Toki was leaning against the counter, barely able to hide his grin. His eyes sparkled with amusement, clearly enjoying every second of Izuku's discomfort. Well, it's not every day I get asked for something like that, Izuku said, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. He was still trying to keep his composure, but he could feel himself slipping. The woman smiled gently, though there was still a playful glint in her eyes. I can imagine. Anyway, I think I'm ready to check out now, she said, placing the items down one by one. I'm actually kind of in a rush. My fiancé, well, he wanted these for tonight. Izuku blinked, his mind trying to catch up with what she was saying. Fiancé. The words didn't quite register at first. His thoughts were still stuck on the word tonight and what she had said just moments ago. Izuku stammered, clearly caught off guard. His thoughts were still tangled, and it took him a moment to pull himself together. Yeah, of course, Toki can, check it out for you. Toki laughs heartily. Don't worry, lady, he is 13, so he will be shy, he says, still chuckling. The woman smiled again, clearly amused at Toki's teasing but not offended. That's okay, she said, glancing back at Izuku. He's just doing his job. Thanks again for your help. She handed the items over to Toki with a friendly smile, and he nodded, his grin still wide. Of course, no problem, Toki said, taking the items and scanning them with a little extra flair, all the while keeping an eye on Izuku's flushed face. That'll be $23.50. Are you paying with a card or cash? I'll use the card, she replied, handing it over. Izuku tried to focus on something else in the store, anything other than the situation in front of him. His face was still burning with embarrassment, and he could feel the heat on his cheeks, but he did his best to look casual. It was a challenge, to say the least. As Toki processed the payment, the woman smiled again at Izuku. By the way, I hope you don't mind that I embarrassed you a little. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, she said, her voice surprisingly warm despite the situation. No, it's fine. Really, Izuku responded quickly, his voice slightly higher than usual. He quickly cleared his throat again. It's just something new to me, that's all. She chuckled softly, seeming to appreciate his honest discomfort. It's all right, you were sweet. Izuku's body jerked in surprise as the bell rang again, the sound momentarily piercing through the tension that had built up in the store. His heart skipped a beat, but before he could react, something entirely unexpected happened. One in the black trench coat suddenly raised both his hands in a strange, yet purposeful way. At first, Izuku thought it was just another odd gesture, maybe some sort of casual movement. But then, a shockwave of realization hit him like a ton of bricks as he saw the man's fingers. He wasn't holding a weapon. His fingers were weapons. With a swift motion, the man fired what looked like gunshots from his hands, right at Izuku. The blast of air, followed by a loud popping sound, sent a sharp pain through Izuku's left forearm. He screamed out as the force of the shot knocked him off his feet, and he slammed into the floor with a heavy thud, the breath knocked out of him for a moment. He lay there, dazed, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. His forearm burned with the sting of the shot, and the world around him felt dizzy and distant. He was slowly bleeding from his arm. But before he could process it any further, he heard the unmistakable sound of the man's finger guns again. No, Izuku gasped as he tried to push himself up from the floor, but the man was faster. He landed an elbow to Izuku's temple, and that is when he felt his world go black. He heard the woman and Toki screaming. He knew one thing: the heroes will be here soon. There was a button under the counter, and if there was an emergency, it was already hit. It would have to be 5 minutes before some hero would come. Izuku's world was a blur, the edges of his consciousness slipping in and out as the pain from the blow to his temple rang through his head. His body felt heavy, and every muscle in his limbs felt like lead. He could barely keep his eyes closed, the darkness swirling in a disorienting mess. It felt like an eternity before he was able to crack open one eyelid. The first thing that hit him was the stifling weight pressing down on his chest. He blinked rapidly, his vision was still hazy as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. His left arm burned with the aftermath of the shot, and the dull throb in his head didn't help his already muddled thoughts. A figure loomed above him, and as his vision cleared, he realized the man in the black trench coat was standing over him, one boot planted firmly on Izuku's stomach. Izuku's breath caught in his throat, panic rising as he recognized the dangerous aura surrounding the man. The man's finger guns were pointed directly at him, the metal barrel glinting ominously under the dim store lighting. The man was talking with Toki about his plan. Thankfully, he didn't notice Izuku was awake. Izuku's mind was racing, each breath he took feeling as though it weighed 100 times more than it should. The stinging pain in his left arm, still raw from the gunshot, throbbed painfully, but he dared not move, trying to stay as still as possible. His vision was still blurry, and the ringing in his ears made it almost impossible to focus on anything clearly. But through the haze, he could hear the conversation between the man in the trench coat and Toki. "So, what now?" Toki asked, his voice unnervingly calm despite the situation. Izuku could hear the tension in the air, the weight of the man's threat hanging over them like an invisible storm. The man shifted slightly, his boot pressing harder against Izuku's chest, a calculated reminder of who was in control. "Now, we wait. I've got a call to make, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to enjoy watching you two squirm while I do," the man said, his voice low and menacing. He moved his hand, casually inspecting his fingers like they were the most ordinary of tools, and Izuku's heart pounded with fear. The man's fingers weren't just weapons, they were his power, his means of control. "You've got what you want, right?" Toki asked, clearly trying to keep the situation from escalating. "Money, ransoms, all that. What else do you need?" The man gave a low chuckle, a sound that made Izuku's stomach turn. "What else do I need? I need time, kid. I'm not an amateur. You don't get to just waltz in and take hostages like it's some game." He bent slightly, his face coming closer to Toki's, his expression as cold as ice. "I'm making a deal, not just shaking you down. And when I'm done here, you're going to wish you never crossed paths with me. I am going to make the most of the money I am going to get." Izuku needed to do something. Who gave a shit if he was quirkless? He needed to stop this man. He needed to protect Toki and this lady. This guy doesn't know he was awake, and he could only open one eye right now anyway. His left eye started to swell, and he needed to do something. Anything. He felt a pulling feeling come to his body. If he had his upper body exposed, you would be able to see that his purple star tattoo on his left shoulder was glowing brightly. Izuku nearly gasped when he heard a voice from the back of his head. "Izuku, my dear boy." Izuku didn't know what to do when that happened, but when that happened, it was as if the world slowed around him. "Izuku, I know you can hear me, and no one else can, but listen to me. My name is Jonathan Joestar. I must say it is very gentlemanly of you to be heroic right now, but listen to this," he said to him softly. Izuku just stared at the man and his surroundings, seeing that nothing much had changed other than Toki standing in front of the woman now. "There is a power that I will transfer to you right now, and I will do so to help you defeat this foe, and I understand that you are given so little information, but we can explain later. All I want you to do is breathe quietly so that this man doesn't hear you. Just inhale and exhale slowly, and a power will come to you. I can handle the rest." Izuku noticed the man's foot had gone to Izuku's leg, meaning that he was letting his guard down, and he wouldn't notice him breathing. Izuku kept his one eye as he listened to this Jonathan guy. Izuku's breath hitched in his chest as he tried to keep his movements imperceptible. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Jonathan Joestar. The name echoed in his head, foreign and familiar at the same time. He couldn't make sense of it. All he could focus on was the pain in his arm and the pressure of the man's boot on his chest. He had to survive this. He had to protect Toki and the woman, no matter what. He followed the voice's instructions, trying to steady his breathing. Inhale. Exhale. It felt odd, like he was trying to calm a storm inside of him. But as he breathed slowly, trying not to alert the man above him, something strange began to happen. The dull ache in his left arm began to fade, and the weight pressing down on his chest became lighter, somehow. He couldn't explain it, but there was a warmth building in his chest, spreading through his body like liquid fire. His purple star tattoo on his shoulder, once faint, began to glow more brightly, and the sensation of power pooling in his limbs was overwhelming. "I know you are feeling it now," Jonathan's voice murmured inside his head. "Now let me handle the rest. Your body will move. It will be your doing with my assistance. Now, be ready to fight this dastardly, corrupt soul." Izuku's heart pounded against his chest as he continued to steady his breath. His vision was clear, and a strange power was building inside him. It was unfamiliar, yet instinctive. The warmth that had started in his chest now spread through his entire body, pushing against the pain and the weight of the man's boot. He could feel his body coming alive in ways he never had before. Jonathan's voice, calm and steady, kept him focused. "Your power is not like anything you've felt before, Izuku. Trust it, let it guide you, and strike with all your might." Izuku's muscles tensed, the overwhelming power flowing through him, almost as though it had always been a part of him. His left arm, though still aching from the shot, now felt more resilient, like the sting of the bullet was nothing more than a distant memory. His body was humming with potential energy, waiting for the right moment. The man in the black trench coat, still unaware that Izuku had regained consciousness, was focused on Toki, who stood in front of the woman. The man smirked at Toki's attempts to keep the situation calm, but Izuku could see that the villain was growing impatient. The villain raised his finger guns again, pointing them toward the hostages, no doubt planning his next move. Izuku's breath caught. This was his moment. He could already feel the power coiling inside him, urging him to move, to strike. "Izuku, you're ready," Jonathan said. "Let go of your doubt and let the power guide your hand." Izuku's body moved before he could consciously think. With a surge of energy, he shot up from the ground, his right hand slamming into the villain's boot with a powerful force. The man was knocked off balance, stumbling backward in surprise, but Izuku wasn't done. The moment the villain's boot left his leg, Izuku sprang forward, using his body's newfound strength and speed. His fist shot out, powered by the strange energy that was now running through him. His punch collided with the man's chest with a sickening thud, the force of the blow sending the villain crashing into the nearby shelves. The shelves rattled with the impact, and the villain's body was sent flying through the air, landing in a heap several feet away. Izuku's breath came in sharp bursts as he stood tall, the world around him still spinning. His body was trembling from the strain of the fight, but he didn't care. His left arm still hurt, but it was manageable now, the strange power somehow numbing the pain. The glow from the star tattoo on his shoulder had intensified, burning brighter with each second that passed. The villain groaned from the wreckage of the store shelves, trying to get up. His eyes were wild with fury as he glared at Izuku, now fully realizing that the boy had more fight in him than he'd expected. "You little brat," the man snarled, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. He raised his hands again, preparing to fire more shots, but Izuku was already on the move. Jonathan's voice echoed in his mind once more, sharp and focused. "Izuku, finish it. Don't hesitate." Izuku's legs were moving faster than he could think, and before the villain could react, Izuku was upon him. The man's fingers trembled as he aimed them at Izuku, but it was too late. Izuku took in a deep breath, feeling the power come back to him once more. Izuku twisted his body with a fluid motion, ducking under the villain's attack and delivering a crushing blow to the man's gut. The villain's eyes widened in pain, his body lurching forward as the force of the punch knocked the wind out of him. Izuku followed through, his muscles firing with strength he never knew he had. He brought his fist up and delivered a final, devastating blow to the villain's face. The punch was powered by the full force of energy coursing through him, and it landed squarely on the man's jaw. The impact was so fierce that it sent the villain flying back, his body colliding with the back wall and crumpling to the floor like a ragdoll. For a moment, the store was silent, save for the distant ringing in Izuku's ears and his own ragged breath. His body was sore, and his vision was still swimming, but he stood over the defeated villain, chest heaving. The man lay unconscious, his body twitching from the force of the blow. Izuku looked down at his hand, still glowing with the strange power sent by Jonathan. The sensation of power began to fade, leaving him feeling drained, but there was no time to rest. He stumbled backward, his legs threatening to give out beneath him, but he forced himself to stay standing. Toki was by his side in an instant, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "Izuku, I'm fine," Izuku managed to say, his voice hoarse. He glanced at the woman, who was still shaken but unharmed. "Is everyone okay?" The woman, who had been frozen in fear during the whole ordeal, nodded, her eyes wide with disbelief. You saved us." Thank you." Izuku gave a tired but genuine smile. "Just doing what's right." His legs buckled beneath him as the adrenaline began to wear off, and he collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. Toki knelt beside him, checking his injuries. "You did it, Izuku." I don't even know how you did that. You were quirkless. You told me you were." Izuku's head lolled to the side, a grin spreading across his face despite the exhaustion. "I don't know what happened, but it felt good. Really good. We will find out soon." Jonathan's voice echoed in his mind one last time, warm and approving. "You did well, Izuku. We'll speak soon. For now, rest." Sirens were blaring in the air as a hero landed in front door. As the distant sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of help, Izuku's body gave out. His vision blurred one last time, and the world around him faded into darkness. His legs finally buckled, and he collapsed into Toki's waiting arms. The adrenaline that had fueled him through the battle drained away in an instant, leaving him weak and disoriented. Toki caught him effortlessly, his face a mix of awe and concern. He gently cradled Izuku in his arms, his voice barely above a whisper as he called out to his friend. Izuku, stay with me." But it was no use. Izuku's eyelids fluttered, then fell shut, unconsciousness claiming him completely. He barely registered the weight of Toki's arms around him or the rush of air as the front door of the store slammed open. The loud crash of it swinging wide echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. A shadow loomed over them, and Yukio, the high-powered pro-hero, burst through the door. Her bright ear twitched, and Yukio scanned the scene in an instant, her sharp eyes locking on the unconscious villain, now sprawled on the floor. She looked down at Toki and Izuku, a concerned frown crossing her features. "What happened here?" she demanded, her voice filled with authority. She took a quick glance at the villain, recognizing him immediately. "It's him, the one we've been tracking." Toki, still holding Izuku, looked up at Yukio with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "Izuku. He took him down. He's the one who stopped him. So, a civilian who was a kid, I assume, took down the villain. Damn kids. Not obeying the laws. Thankfully, there is a law for defending oneself, and he was clearly shot and beaten up, so that is different in this case," she said, crouching down to look over him. Yukio's eyes softened for a brief moment as she checked Izuku's condition. His skin was pale, and his body was covered in bruises, but there was no immediate threat to his life. She ran a hand through her blonde hair, her sharp eyes glinting with curiosity and concern. "You really saved the day, huh, kid?" Toki, still holding Izuku carefully, nodded, his expression filled with a quiet reverence for his friend. "I didn't even know he could do that. He's quirkless, Yukio. He told me himself." Yukio's brow furrowed as she took in the information. "Quirkless, huh? That doesn't make sense. Not after seeing what he did." She shifted her gaze to Izuku's glowing star tattoo after looking at his chest for other wounds, which was still faintly pulsing despite his unconsciousness. "This is something else. It is rare, but there are a few cases where people can activate quirks past the age limit for them, and he may be the case." Toki was about to speak when a group of police officers, along with a few other heroes, barged through the store's broken door. Yukio straightened up and moved aside, allowing them to take over. The police officers moved quickly to secure the unconscious villain, while one of the paramedics rushed over to check on Izuku. "Hold on, we'll take care of him," the paramedic reassured Toki as they began to work on stabilizing Izuku. Toki, however, wasn't sure if he could just stand aside. This kid had just done something extraordinary, and he needed answers. "Yukio, is there any way to figure out what happened to him?" Toki asked, his voice low with worry. He shouldn't have been able to do any of that. Not without a quirk. Yukio crossed her arms, her sharp eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Yeah, there's a way. The Hero Commission has equipment that can scan for quirk activity, latent or active. And hospitals can run detailed bio-quirk analyses too, though that's usually for cases where quirks mutate or awaken later in life. She glanced down at Izuku, her mouth tightening into a small frown. Whatever this is, it's not normal. But it's not impossible either. Toki clenched his jaw, feeling a strange knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Can you help him get checked out? I don't want them thinking he's dangerous or something. Yukio's eyes softened, just a bit. Kid's a hero, not a threat. Trust me, I'll make sure they don't treat him like some villain. She gave Toki a brief nod of assurance before turning toward the paramedics. Make sure he's taken to Musudafu General. And get the bio-scan ready. One of the paramedics, a woman with short, dark hair, nodded briskly. Understood, Pro-Hero Yukio. You will be compensated for your damages to the store. For now, go home and rest and check if you need to. You might be able to see the brat later, but for now, he will be checked out, she said, escorting them out and getting him to the ambulance. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance, Izuku remained unconscious, hooked up to a monitor that beeped steadily. The paramedic sitting beside him kept a close eye on his vitals, occasionally jotting down notes. She couldn't help but glance at the star tattoo on his shoulder, curiosity flickering across her features. What are you, kid? She murmured under her breath. The ride to Musudafu General was swift, the streets were cleared for emergency vehicles. Once they arrived, a team of doctors and specialists was already waiting. They worked quickly, moving Izuku into a private room and beginning preliminary scans. One of the doctors, a stern-looking man with gray at his temples, tapped on a tablet as he oversaw the team. Subject: male, approximately 13 years old, registered as quirkless, yet shows evidence of energy release beyond standard human capabilities, he muttered. Get the bio-quirk analyzer ready. The steady beeping of the monitor filled the sterile room as the medical team worked around Izuku. Yukio stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed, her sharp gaze never leaving the boy lying unconscious on the hospital bed. She was no stranger to strange cases, quirks mutating, late awakenings, even unknown abilities manifesting under extreme stress, but something about this case gnawed at her. A registered quirkless kid, using powers like that. It didn't sit right. She stepped forward, catching the attention of the lead nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard tucked under her arm. I want his file, Yukio said bluntly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Now, the nurse blinked, startled, but nodded quickly. Why yes, of course, Pro-Hero Yukio. She hurried over to a nearby terminal, tapping away. A few tense moments passed before she printed out a thin stack of papers and handed them to Yukio. Yukio flipped through the file rapidly, scanning the basics first. Name: Izuku Midoriya. Age: 13. Status: quirkless. School: Aldera Junior High. No emergency contact listed. No parents listed. No guardian listed. She froze, her eyes narrowing. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to the nurse. There's no parent or guardian information on here, Yukio said, her voice dangerously calm. Why? Says here he made the decision to leave the orphanage he was staying at after numerous rejections, and no one wanted to adopt him. Likely for being quirkless. Says it happened a few months ago on his birthday, she said to her bluntly. Damn, she said quietly. Yukio's mouth tightened into a grim line as she lowered the file. It wasn't just the quirklessness that had isolated him, it was society itself, the cold cruelty of a world that valued strength over spirit. Her eyes softened slightly as she looked back at Izuku, lying still on the hospital bed, tubes and wires connected to him. He had no one, no family to stand at his side, no one to shield him. But somehow, he had found the strength to protect others anyway. Keep monitoring him, she ordered the staff, her voice regaining its hard edge. And start the bio-quirk analysis immediately. I want results the moment they're available. The nurse nodded and moved swiftly to carry out the command. Yukio lingered at the edge of the room, arms crossed. Her thoughts were racing faster than she liked. If the commission caught wind of this, they'd be crawling all over the boy, desperate to dissect what made him different. Some might see him as a weapon, not a child. And after everything he'd already been through, she wasn't about to let that happen. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a secure number she rarely used. After a few rings, the call connected. "This is Yukio," she said quietly. "I need a favor. Sensitive case. Potential late quirk awakening in a minor. No guardians. No backup. He needs protection, not scrutiny. You in?" A deep voice answered without hesitation. "Always. Send me the details." Relief, thin and fleeting, coursed through her. She ended the call and tucked the phone away, just as one of the doctors approached, tablet in hand. "We're picking up something," he said, brow furrowed. "It's not a traditional quirk signature. There's no standard gene activation like we usually see in quirk awakenings." "Then what is it?" Yukio pressed. The doctor hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. "It's like his body is being energized by an external force. His cells are reacting to something, enhancing themselves at a rapid rate. This may sound weird, but this is a quirk, but it isn't at the same time." Yukio looked confused but nodded anyway. "Keep finding out info and tell me when you find out more," she said, sitting in the chair across the room. "Of course," said the nurse, still scanning. "With Izuku." Izuku stirred, the world around him swirling like mist caught in a storm. He blinked, trying to see through the hazy fog surrounding him. Voices, some gentle, some gruff, floated closer. "Jotaro, would you at least quit looking over him so intently? It's getting creepy," grumbled a young man with a pompadour hairstyle, casually running a comb through his thick hair, Josuke Higashikata. "Good grief, would you shut up for a second, Josuke? I am just checking him out to see what makes him different. Can't I be curious about one of our descendants?" Jotaro Kujo replied in his usual gruff tone, his hands shoved into the pockets of his black coat. Nearby, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a simple, elegant blue suit stood with his arms crossed, Jonathan Joestar. His face, kind yet serious, was etched with concern as he observed Izuku. "Patience, Jotaro. He needs time to awaken properly," Jonathan said, his deep voice carrying warmth and strength. "Don't mind Jotaro, Grandpa Jonathan, we know how Jotaro can be quite a handful. Though he is right, I am indeed curious about our descendant here. He is interesting. Being able to use Hammon, albeit weak," said a young and confident voice, Joseph Joestar. Izuku felt confused because he could open his eyes this second, but what the hell was Hammon? Strange. Before he could even try to process Hammon, another voice spoke, smooth and calm like a river running beneath golden light. "He's unlike any of us," said Giorno Giovanna, standing slightly apart from the others, his hands clasped behind his back. His vivid golden hair caught the light in an otherworldly way. His sharp, perceptive eyes studied Izuku closely, not with suspicion, but with understanding. "There's a gentleness in him, yet also a strength waiting to be drawn out." Giorno's words lingered for a moment before another, far more energetic voice broke through. "Hey, look!" cried Jolin Kujo, bouncing slightly on her feet, her braided hair swinging. She pointed excitedly. "He's sitting up." All heads turned toward Izuku, who, indeed, was now sitting upright, groggily rubbing at his eyes. His heart raced as he looked around at the group gathered before him, feeling wildly out of place. They all looked young. No older than their late teens or early 20s, but there was something ancient and powerful about the way they carried themselves, as if their youth was only skin deep. Jonathan, towering like a noble knight, took a slow step forward, smiling warmly to ease the tension. "Easy now, you're safe here, young Midoriya." Izuku stared at him, wide-eyed. Where am I?" he croaked out, his throat dry. Joseph grinned brightly and gave a two-fingered salute. "Somewhere between worlds, kiddo. Long story short, you're kinda special." "Kinda," Josuke echoed, raising an eyebrow. "That's putting it lightly." Jotaro huffed through his nose, still observing Izuku carefully. "You're not dead, if that's what you're worried about. This is, well, call it a spiritual meeting place." Izuku's head was spinning. Meeting place. Hammon. Descendants. I don't understand. Giorno approached slowly, his voice calm and precise. "You have blood in you that ties back to us. The Joestar Bloodline. It's awakened something inside you, something powerful, something ancient." "Hold the phone for a quick second," said Izuku. "I have requests. Firstly, Please start with everything from the beginning. Secondly, what the hell is this Joestar Bloodline? Thirdly, what is this spiritual meeting place? Fourthly, why the hell is everyone here so tall? Like all of you are over 6 feet, he asked, backing up to take all of them in. Jonathan looks slightly embarrassed. Oh, forgive us, dear boy. Let's start with introductions. My name is Jonathan Joestar, he said, looking over to Joseph, hoping he would catch on. The name is Joseph Joestar. Grandson to Jonathan, he said, pointing to him, smirking. And I'm Jotaro Kujo, Joseph's grandson, said Jotaro, tipping his hat slightly in greeting, his expression staying as stoic as ever. Josuke Higashikata, Josuke chimed in, giving a flashy thumb up. I'm kinda related through a complicated family tree thing. Technically, I am Joseph's son, and Jotaro is my nephew, who was like 8 years older than me or something, but we can tell you more details later, he said, waving it off. Giorno Giovanna, said the golden-haired youth with a courteous nod. Technically, I'm the son of Dio. But with Jonathan's body, so, by blood, I'm still a Joestar. But I prefer being Jonathan's son cause fuck that vampire bastard, he says quietly. And I'm Jolin Kujo, Jotaro's daughter, she said proudly, planting a hand on her hip. Nice to meet ya, and if you are wondering where you play a role in all of this, you kid, are my great-grandchild. So yeah, she says, smiling, ruffling his hair. What the hell? Asked Izuku, confused, looking at all of them. This is the weirdest family tree I have ever seen. Plus, Hammon, Dio, why do you all look so young? What the hell? Hold on, kid, don't overthink this, said Joseph, hopping down in front of him, his brown hair swaying. He places a hand on his shoulder and sighs. Listen, we will start with everything from the beginning, but first, I will answer the easier questions, he said, showing him his Joestar purple star birthmark. Do answer the first easy request. We have heard you call this a tattoo when it is a birthmark. Those with the Joestar bloodline are born with this. This is how you know you have the bloodline. We all have it, kid, he said with everyone else showing him. Izuku showed his shoulder to have the same exact mark. Izuku stared at the star-shaped mark on his shoulder, his mind racing. It had always been there. He remembered doctors brushing it off as an unusual birthmark, nothing to worry about. But now, seeing the exact same mark on all of them, he felt something deeper stir within him. A connection, a thread stretching across time and space. Jonathan smiled gently. You see, young Izuku, you are one of us. A Joestar, by blood and spirit. So, one of my parents was a Joestar or whatever. But wait, I was dumped at the orphanage. How come I can't see my other ancestors in this spiritual place? He asked, looking at the 6 of them. Giorno looked over at him and sighed. From what we learned of this place, it is the Joestars are the people who have Joestar blood, who have the most willpower, the most fighting spirit, or the most courage, who are transferred here. Technically, we are spirits, but we are not. Some of us lived over 100 years old, and others lived barely past 20. But what we do know is that when we were transferred here, we became youthful again. We have been here for years, waiting for someone to come along who has tremendous will or something along those lines. That was you, he said calmly, adjusting his black jacket. Izuku gawked at them, feeling the weight of their words sink in. He wasn't just some kid with a weird birthmark. He wasn't just a late-blooming hero, hopeful, struggling to find his place. He was part of something bigger. Something ancient and powerful, and apparently, cursed with tall, ridiculously good-looking ancestors. It made sense why he was tall now. Well, it makes sense why I am 6 feet tall at 13, Izuku said, trying to make light of the situation. Josuke laughed good-naturedly and walked over to him. You said you wanted to learn everything from the beginning, and I got that covered. Jotaro will take over the rest since he studied it extensively, Josuke said, clearing his throat to speak. Izuku sat down, knowing that this was going to be a while and a lengthy conversation. You see, kid, we weren't here just chilling out, waiting for you to come along. We could see the outside world for the most part. We learned what happened with quirks and everything. So, from the beginning, Jonathan over here had a stepbrother who was adopted into the family named Dio Brando. There was a big falling out where they were fighting each other. Jonathan later acquired the power that you use, and it is called Hammon. It is like sunlight energy, pure life force channeled through controlled breathing. With it, you can heal, destroy evil beings like vampires, and strengthen your physical capabilities dramatically. Hammon was originally taught to humans to counter supernatural threats, like vampires, and Dio, after becoming a vampire himself, became one of humanity's greatest enemies. Joestar leaned back, giving Izuku a second to absorb it before continuing. Jonathan fought Dio using Hammon. He was the first Joestar to stand against that kind of evil. Their rivalry shaped the destiny of the Joestar Bloodline. Dio survived, though barely, and sometime later, he stole Jonathan's body after a tragic battle at sea. Izuku's mouth hung open. Yeah, it gets weird, but Dio was just ahead, and he needed a body. He grew fascinated with the Joestar Bloodline, and he took Jonathan's body after killing him. You would think that was the end of the Joestar Bloodline, but it wasn't. Jonathan got his woman, Irina, pregnant, and later she had a son, George Joestar II, named after Jonathan's father, who was killed by Dio, he said, taking in a breath. George Joestar II later had a child named, he said, pointing to Joseph. Joseph Joestar, Joestar finished proudly, motioning toward the grinning man with slicked back brown hair. Joseph chuckled, giving a playful salute. Yup, that's me, trickster, Hammon master, and overall handsome devil. Jonathan gave a fond shake of his head at Joseph's antics but gestured for Joestar to continue. Right, so Joseph grew up during a pretty crazy time, World War II and all that. But more importantly, he had to deal with remnants of Dio's evil and these ancient beings called the Pillar Men, Joestar said, crossing his arms. They were these super powerful, god-like creatures who were the ancestors of vampires, and they were searching for the Red Stone of Asia to become ultimate beings. Izuku blinked rapidly. Pillar Men, like actual pillars, or? Joseph barked out a laugh. No, kid, they were just sealed inside stone pillars for centuries. When they woke up, they were, well, bad news. Real bad, but with Hammon, my smarts, and a lot of running away, I managed to defeat them. With help of course. Joestar nodded. Joseph's battles made the Joestar bloodline even stronger. See, by constantly fighting overwhelming threats and surviving against impossible odds, our bloodline kept evolving. Our bodies adapted to channel Hammon naturally, and later on, something even crazier happened. Izuku leaned in, hanging on to every word. That crazy thing, Jotaro cut in, adjusting his cap, was stands. Stands, Izuku echoed. They're a manifestation of one's fighting spirit. After Dio stole Jonathan's body and somehow survived for 100 years underwater, he came back into the world. But because he was using a Joestar body, when he awakened his own stand, it triggered the latent potential in all of Jonathan's descendants, giving birth to stands among the Joestar lineage. Giorno, standing quietly at the side, spoke up. A stand is an ability, usually a semi-physical entity, that represents your soul's power. They can be all sorts of things. Some are strong in direct combat, others are about manipulation, healing, defense, or even controlling time itself. And because of Dio's meddling with Jonathan's body, stand abilities exploded into the bloodline, Jolin added, tossing her braid over her shoulder. That's why we all have different powers. Some of us got crazy strong stands. Others developed abilities that changed everything around us. Izuku's head spun. So, quirks, you're saying quirks might be stands. Joestar smirked at him. Just give us a second. Stands gave us unique powers. Jotaro and an older Joseph were going to fight Dio after surviving for 100 years. Long story short, Jotaro killed him. However, Hammon became almost non-existent. Stands took to the front of the helm. But regardless of that, here are our stand names, he said, letting everyone take over. Joseph clapped his hands together, grinning widely. Right, let's introduce the crew properly. My stand is called Hermit Purple. It's not flashy like some of the others, it's basically these thorny purple vines I can summon. I can use it to swing around, bind enemies, and even do spirit photography, like taking psychic pictures of faraway things. Even finding out answers to questions that I need in a crunch, he chuckled softly. Jotaro, still standing tall and stoic, tipped his cap forward. My stand is Star Platinum. It's one of the strongest stands, incredible speed, precision, and raw strength. Eventually, it even evolved the ability to stop time for a few seconds. Useful, but dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Izuku's eyes widened even more. Stop time. This was getting crazier by the second. Josuke stepped forward, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. My stand's called Crazy Diamond. It can punch really hard, but its main ability is to restore things to their original state, like fixing a broken wall or healing a person's injuries. Pretty fitting, right? I like to think of myself as a healer and a fighter. Giorno's golden hair gleamed under the strange spiritual light as he spoke, his voice calm and measured. My stand is Gold Experience. It grants life. I can create plants, animals, and even heal people by accelerating their life energy. Usually, from non-living things, which is strange. It evolved later on, but I will talk about it later. Jolin was next, tossing an imaginary baseball into the air and catching it lazily. Mine's stone-free. I can unravel my body into strings, controlling them however I want. I can use them for attacks, create nets, or even listen to distant conversations by vibrating the strings. It's super versatile. Izuku sat there, mouth dry, trying to keep track of everything. It was like someone dumped a lifetime's worth of information on him in less than an hour. Anyway, we all had our enemies. Jotaro finished off Dio. Jotaro and I dealt with someone called Yoshikage Kira. Giorno dealt with a mafia boss named Diavolo. Jolin, well, she attempted to fight a man named Enrico Pucci, he said, making the others frown. Izuku felt the shift and paid even closer attention now. Jotaro saw his daughter distraught and decided to take over. Quote, Jotaro took a step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he picked up where Josuke left off. Pucci was a real piece of work. He was a priest who became obsessed with achieving heaven, a perfect world where everything was predetermined. He had a stand called Made in Heaven, which could accelerate time itself, speeding up everything around him to a dangerous degree. It was likely the strongest stand ever, aside from Giorno's evolved one, but anyway, we lost. I fought alongside my daughter and her friends against him, but we were killed. The stand he had accelerated time so fast that it created a new rebirth of our universe. It was a universal reset, he said calmly, taking a breath. However, a boy named Imperio was able to stop Pucci, but not before Pucci had created an additional universe reset, he said. In this universe, it created a new version of myself and Jolin, I believe, even everyone here aside from Jonathan. We were the same thing but different, he said, gauging Izuku's reaction. Izuku's eyes widened, processing the sheer weight of what Jotaro had just explained. A universe reset, that sounded like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, and it was happening right here in front of him. He tried to imagine the chaos of a reality where everything was altered, where time itself could be manipulated at will. So, you're telling me that all of you, Izuku said slowly, died in one universe, but now you're here, in another. Jotaro nodded solemnly. Exactly. It's complicated. The second universal reset that Pucci had created is this one right here. The one that you are in. Now, the new Jolin from this universe had a son. However, her son was a part of the first people to ever have quirks. Not the first, but one of the first. His quirk was a simple one. It allowed him to be triple-jointed, but it was a quirk. It was strange. Everyone had stands at the time. I would like to note to you that a stand user can only see stands. But, with Jolin's son not being able to use a stand or have one, a quirk took the place of that, he said, and the lightbulb clicked in Izuku's head. Izuku leaned forward, his mind racing to catch up with Jotaro's words. So, you're saying that in this new universe, stands became quirks? Jotaro nodded. That is our theory of it. Stand users just stopped existing. Quirks to the place of stands, however, everyone could see the quirks. It was very strange. Soon, every stand user died out, and there are no more stand users on the planet. Only people with quirks and the quirkless, he said calmly, resting a hand on Jolin's shoulder. Izuku's mind was racing, trying to digest the information pouring out from Jotaro. This was beyond anything he'd ever heard or imagined. A universe reset, stands becoming quirks. It was like a mix of sci-fi and fantasy colliding with reality in ways that made his head spin. But, that means, Izuku began, his voice shaky, the whole world is different now. The people with quirks, everyone with one, is somehow connected to your stand powers. Jotaro gave a short nod. In a sense, yes. What's fascinating is how the stand abilities, though unique to each user, were replaced by quirks in this new universe. At first, it seemed like a mere side effect of the reset, but we started to realize that quirks were the result of the universe shifting into a state that no longer required the existence of stands. Joseph, still standing near the group, raised an eyebrow at Jotaro's words. Yeah, but it's more complicated than that. The problem isn't just that stands disappeared. The reset also altered the way the universe functions. It was like everything that had happened before never truly happened. Everything was in flux, as if this universe was a version of the one we knew, but it wasn't quite right. Izuku's head throbbed with the weight of it all. He had heard of universe-altering phenomena before, like quirk singularities, when quirks began to evolve and develop in ways people couldn't control, but nothing on the scale of what the Joestars were describing. So, what happened to the rest of the stand users? Izuku asked, his voice quieter now. If quirks replaced the stands, then, are they still out there? Do they have the same abilities? No, Josuke chimed in, shaking his head, not exactly. The people who were stand users before the reset, well, they're not alive, but they don't have their stands anymore. All that remains are their memories, their experiences. But their power, gone. Most passed, hundreds of years ago. The only reason we remember is because we are here in this spiritual place. Izuku took in everything that was being said, his mind spinning in a way he couldn't have imagined. Stand abilities, universe resets, and the shifting of reality itself, it was all so far beyond what he knew. Yet, somehow, it was also familiar. His own world had experienced something like that when quirks began to evolve and change, but to think that something as monumental as a universe reset could reshape the very fabric of existence was too much to fully comprehend. So, what is the deal with this now? He asked, standing up. Is this Hammond my quirk, or can I use your stands as quirks? He asked. They were good questions. Giorno looked at him softly. This is the confusing part. You have a quirk, but you don't. You won't be able to use stands, but you might be able to use our said powers with training. Hammond also died out with the universe resets. However, you have gotten a taste of Hammond because you were quirkless. Hammond had awakened in you because you were quirkless, as well as you wanted to do everything in your power to protect those two people. No matter what, and that is when Jonathan was able to reach you to help, he said. Izuku felt a strange warmth rise in his chest as Giorno's words settled in. His mind, still struggling to grasp the weight of what had been said, now had something that felt like a piece of the puzzle. You're saying I have Hammond now, even though I didn't have a quirk before? Izuku asked, his voice quiet, as if testing the theory out loud. Giorno nodded, his golden eyes reflecting a deep understanding. Yes, that's exactly it. Hammond was something that transcended the boundaries of quirks. It's not something everyone can use, but in your case, with your connection to the Joestar Bloodline and the way you approached your desire to protect others, it awakened in you. It's a part of you now, but it doesn't mean you can fully use it like we did back in our time. You have to train to make it stronger. Jonathan stepped in to take over from his son. You see, Hammond, though dormant until now, has been flowing through our bloodline for hundreds of years. It never left our bloodline even after the reset. It was slowly waiting patiently. The last person to use it on our bloodline was Joseph, but now, after all this time, it is in you. There are no zombies, vampires, or the undead in this world as far as we know, but that doesn't mean that Hammond hasn't gotten stronger with time, he said, smiling. But what do I do now? Izuku asked, his voice full of determination. I want to get stronger, not just for myself, but for everyone. How do I unlock the full potential of Hammond? That is where we can come in, said Joseph, putting an arm around his grandfather. We can help you, but as of now, in the real world, you are tired and need rest. So, we will wait for some other time, he said, patting his head. Yeah, that makes sense, Izuku said, looking at the ground. Jolin patted his shoulder as she smiled softly at him. Remember what we said. You might not be able to use a stance since it conflicts with this world, but you could get some of the powers of our stance. Just keep that in mind. We don't know how, but we have a feeling, she says happily. Izuku chuckled at her happiness and looked over to the corner to notice 3 figures that were fading and pulsing with bright energy. Hey, what is that? Asked Izuku as everyone turned their heads. They all looked over to the 3 figures with curiosity. The 3 figures stood in the corner, their outlines flickering in and out of focus like shadows trying to maintain their form in the midst of a storm. The air around them pulsed with energy, the kind of energy that was both foreign and familiar, like a forgotten memory attempting to resurface. They didn't move, but there was an undeniable presence about them. The others could feel it, a strange sensation of recognition mixed with complete uncertainty. The first figure was tall and lean, his body slightly slouched as if weighed down by an invisible burden. His hair was a wild, dirty blonde mess, streaked with an almost iridescent shine that flickered like the faintest light in the dark. He wore a horseshoe beanie hat that obscured some of his face, but the sharp line of his jaw was visible beneath the shadow. His eyes, when visible, gleamed with a quiet intensity, the kind of gaze that spoke of untold stories and battles fought long ago. His attire was rugged, resembling an adventurer's worn-out jacket and pants, along with boots that looked like they had walked through many a rough terrain. There was a sense of quiet authority about him, but also something deeply unsettling, like a person trapped between 2 realities. He wasn't moving, but the energy around him seemed to warp the space itself. The second figure was notably different but equally imposing. His build was wiry, with a more compact frame that hinted at hidden strength. All that could be seen were his eyes, sharp and full of a quiet, knowing intelligence. There was an eerie calmness about him, the kind that made it clear he had seen far more than he was willing to let on. A faint, almost predatory grin pulled at the corner of his lips, as though he was aware of something the others were not. He had a big gap between his teeth, which made him stand out. From what they could see, he was wearing a sailor outfit. The third figure was more striking in a way that made it impossible to ignore him. His features were sharp, almost regal, with an athletic build that looked honed from years of training. His head was partially covered by a hood, casting shadows over most of his face. His hair was a light shade of white from what they could tell. His eyes were electric green, glowing with an inner fire that seemed to pierce right through anyone who met his gaze. His expression, though unreadable, held an air of determination, as if he had a purpose only he understood. His clothes were tight-fitting and stylish, a fusion of elegance and function, an outfit meant for someone who moved swiftly and decisively. The figures didn't move, but the way they stood seemed to make the room feel like it was shrinking in on itself. Their forms flickered intermittently, as if the fabric of reality around them was unstable, pulling and stretching in strange ways. The rest of the group, their faces filled with curiosity and wariness, watched them intently. There was an instinctive sense of familiarity with these figures, but no one could place why. Izuku squinted at them, a frown forming on his face. What is that? His voice was uncertain, as if he wasn't sure if he had truly seen what he thought he had. The 3 figures, bathed in that strange flickering energy, remained still, completely silent. Jotaro's eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a look with Joseph. I don't know, he said slowly. That's new. Joseph nodded in agreement, his face etched with concern. Yeah, it doesn't feel right. They look familiar, but I can't place them. He stepped forward, squinting as he stared at the figures. This energy is different from anything I've felt before. Well, regardless of what the hell those things are in the corner, said Jonathan, walking over to Izuku. I think that it is time we let him go back to the real world, he said with the others nodding. We will be in touch, Izuku, said Jotaro. Just rest for now, and we can get in contact with you later. We will figure out what the hell these things are for the time being, Jotaro said as Izuku started to fade in and out. Izuku nodded slowly, still feeling the disorienting effects of everything he had just been told. His mind was still spinning, trying to wrap around the idea of Hammon, Stans, and the universe reset. There was so much that felt familiar yet strange, and the flickering figures in the corner only added to the mystery. He could feel his body growing heavy as exhaustion settled in, a consequence of everything he had just learned and experienced. Thanks for everything, Izuku muttered, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. The Joestars had shared so much with him, and though he still had more questions than answers, he could sense their genuine desire to help him understand. His eyes fluttered as the world around him began to fade. The last thing he saw was the worried look on Jotaro's face and the strange energy of the three figures still flickering in the corner, as if waiting for something. The world faded to black. Izuku awoke slowly. His eyes adjusted to the room around him. He was in the hospital and remembered the incident with the villain at the store. It looked like it was midday outside, and he looked around his surroundings. Izuku blinked as the midday sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting warm rays across the sterile white sheets covering him. He shifted slightly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles and the dull ache that seemed to weigh on every part of his body. The lingering fog of sleep clung to his mind, but the memories of the strange dream, or vision, were still fresh, vivid as if they had been seared into his very soul. The Joestars. The universe reset. Hammond. He stared at the ceiling, trying to piece it all together. Was it just a dream brought on by exhaustion and injury, or was it something more? Deep down, he knew it wasn't just a dream. He could still feel the strange warmth humming faintly in his chest, a warmth that felt different from anything he'd experienced before. It was like a spark waiting to be kindled into something greater. "Oh, you are awake," said Yuki, stretching her arms above her head. "You've been out for 12 hours. You didn't miss much. I notified you junior high about everything," she said calmly, but Izuku was gazing at the number 9 pro hero. Why was she here? Was she the hero closest to the store when it all went down? Why is she talking to me? I am only 13. Ma'am, I don't mean any disrespect, but he was cut off by chuckling. "Kid, I am 22 years old. Don't call me ma'am," she said, smiling at him. Then, "Miss Yuki, why are you here? I wouldn't think I am that important," he said, sitting up to see that his arm was bandaged, and his eye was still somewhat swollen. Yuki gave a small, amused sigh and walked over to the chair beside his hospital bed, pulling it closer before sitting down. "You're not in trouble if that's what you're worried about," she said, resting her elbows on her knees and lacing her fingers together. "I'm here because, well, what happened to you wasn't normal. Even for a world full of quirks." Izuku tilted his head slightly, ignoring the fresh pulse of pain that sparked from the motion. "Oh, right, I activated a quirk when I was already quirkless. I wasn't lying if that is what you mean. The power just happened, and then I defended myself," he said to her calmly. Yuki gave a small chuckle, but it wasn't mocking. It was a warm understanding. "I know you weren't lying, Midoriya," she said, leaning back slightly. "But I know that you have a quirk now and that you are part of the exception of getting one past a certain age." Izuku then realized something. He shouldn't tell her about this, Hammond, and the Joestars. It would complicate everything. He didn't like lying, but it's not like he was, regardless. It's all pretty new to me," he said, looking at her. "It is an honor to have you talking to me, though," he says, scratching the back of his neck. Yuki smiled warmly at his modesty, her sharp eyes softening just a touch. "You're a good kid," she said simply. "And good kids sometimes get swept up in big things before they're ready. It's not fair, but that's the world we live in." Izuku looked down at his bandaged hands, clenching them lightly. He could still feel that faint, buzzing warmth coursing through him, gentle yet insistent, like a heartbeat just beneath his skin. Hammond. The Joestars. A universe reset. It was all so much. But somehow, he wasn't scared. Not anymore. "So," Yuki continued, crossing one leg over the other, "the official story is that your latent quirk awakened under extreme stress. That's what the Hero Commission will file it as, and it's the story you should stick to. It's rare, but not impossible." She left the part where she was lying to the Hero Commission about what happened. She left out that he was an orphan and was currently living on his own. They didn't need another Lady Nagant situation on their hands. "Well, at least I have a quirk now," he said to himself. "I can be a hero now," he said, smiling. "That you can, but I wanted to talk to you about something. What I will tell you is that your quirk gave off weird signatures. It is a strange power, and it is labeled as a mutant quirk more specifically. Do you happen to know what your parents' quirks were?" she asked, already knowing of his past. Izuku sighed, "Afraid I don't. Never knew them or their quirks. I just know that they dropped me off one day and left me. Yuku nodded, her face losing some of its earlier warmth. Yeah, I read the reports, she said quietly. Sorry, kid, that's rough. Izuku shrugged a little, though the motion pulled at his sore muscles. It's okay. I'm used to it. I had some good caretakers at least. Sometimes, or occasionally anyway, he said, trailing off as old memories surfaced. Yuku tapped her fingers lightly on her knee, her expression thoughtful. Still, it could explain why your power's so different, she mused aloud. Have you applied for the orphan monthly stipend law? You get 2,250 a month until you turn 18 if you are never adopted past the age of 12. She asked. Yeah, I have, he said, sounding annoyed. I did 3 months ago, and not a word other than, we are still reviewing your progress, and, you don't fit the credentials. I don't mean to be that guy, but it is because I am, or was a quirkless orphan. That was the reason why I was never adopted. No one wants a quirkless child. It's sad but true, he said somewhat bitterly. Yuku's brows furrowed in clear frustration, her mouth pressing into a thin line. It wasn't fair. None of it was. She had seen this kind of thing before, kids falling through the cracks because society still, for all its talk of equality, valued power over people. You're right, she said bluntly. It is because of that. And it's bullshit. Izuku's eyes widened slightly at her cursing, but it made him feel a strange sort of comfort. She wasn't sugarcoating anything for him like so many others had tried to do. Look, Yuku continued, leaning closer, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend the system isn't messed up. But you're in a different position now. Whether you ask for it or not, you've got power. Real power. And that means you have a chance to change things. I will change something, and I will personally pay you a monthly amount and make sure you are getting enough money not to work a job. He looked at her, shocked, but she continued. Yeah, I know that you were working at a job. Now I know a 13 can have a job, but at most it should be a part-time one. Not one where he is working an all-nighter, and they're going to school a couple of hours later. It's unhealthy, and you are too young for that, so I will help with the money, she said calmly. Izuku opened his mouth, then closed it, completely stunned. No one had ever offered him something like that before. No strings attached, no judgment, no pity. Just genuine help. I can't let you do that, he said finally, shaking his head despite the way his heart twisted with hope. You don't even know me. Yuku smiled, but it was tinged with something sadder, older, a weight that Izuku could feel in the space between them. I know enough, she said. I know what it's like to be overlooked, to have to fight twice as hard just to get half as far. And I know what it's like to see someone who reminds you a little too much of yourself at that age. Izuku's throat tightened. He looked down again, gripping the blanket over his legs. The room was quiet for a few long moments, save for the soft beeping of the heart monitor beside him. I don't want to be a burden, he said, his voice small. Yuku snorted softly, a dry little laugh. Kid, you surviving a broken system isn't a burden on anyone. If anything, it's a failure on those who were supposed to make the world better. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms thoughtfully. Besides, I'm not doing charity here. Think of it as an investment. He blinked up at her, confused. An investment. You have potential, she said plainly. More than you realize. I can see it. So, consider it a head start. A way to make sure you have the foundation to grow into someone who can really make a difference. Izuku didn't know what to say. Part of him still screamed that this was wrong, that he didn't deserve it, that there had to be a catch somewhere. But another part, the part that had stubbornly refused to give up even when the world had nothing for him, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this time it was okay to accept help. Okay, he said finally, voice hoarse. Thank you, Miss Yuku. I'll make sure it's not wasted. Her smile turned gentle again. I know you will. Here is my card if you need anything. Call it. Izuku took the card with both hands, as if it were something sacred. The simple white rectangle bore her name, a contact number, and an embossed gold emblem of her hero agency. He stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to tuck it away or just keep holding onto it like an anchor. Thanks, he repeated quietly, eyes flicking up to meet hers. I mean it. Yuku stood and stretched again, her joints popping softly. She walked over to the window and looked out at the bright city beyond, then turned back to him with a more serious expression. Listen, I need to get going, but take it easy, kid. I'll set up the thing with your account, she said, getting ready to walk out the door. Izuku nodded slowly, still clutching the card in his bandaged hand like it might vanish if he let go. I will, he said, watching Yukio approach the door. She paused there, one hand on the frame, and glanced back over her shoulder. And Midoriya, he looked up. That warmth you feel, whatever it is, don't ignore it. The world might call it a quirk or label it something else entirely, but at the end of the day, it's yours. Own it, learn it, and if you ever need help navigating that power, or anything else, you call me. With that, she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway before fading into the quiet hum of the hospital. Izuku sat in silence for a long while after, his gaze unfocused. The card in his hand now rested gently on the bedside table, and the late afternoon sun had begun to cast a warmer orange tint across the floor. His fingers tingled. That warmth, Hammon, was still present. Subtle, like a whisper, not in his ears, but in his bones. He lifted his hand in front of his face and studied it. He didn't feel different, not physically. But he remembered the moment in the store. The way his breath had deepened, the way his muscles had surged with energy, how he'd moved on instinct, faster and stronger than ever before. That ripple of power wasn't a quirk, he understood. It didn't feel like it came from nowhere. It felt ancient. He exhaled slowly, steadying his breath, and focused. Breathe through the nose, out through the mouth. Control, precision, rhythm. He remembered the breathing techniques. They had come to him in the dream, or vision, like memories that weren't his. He followed the pattern, letting his breath fall into a rhythm, calm and strong. A faint tingle stirred beneath the surface of his skin. Not painful, not overwhelming. Just a hum, like sunlight dancing through his veins. Hammon, he wasn't crazy. Something had changed. Something was awakened. The door clicked open again, startling him from his thoughts. A nurse peeked in, clipboard in hand and a gentle smile on her face. Oh, good, you're up, she said, stepping in. We've checked your vitals, and it looks like you'll be clear to leave in a few hours, as long as your condition remains stable. Few hours? Izuku asked. That soon? She nodded. You're healing surprisingly fast. Your swelling has gone down dramatically, and your bruises are already fading. It's almost like, well, I'd say you had a healing type quirk, but that's not what the scans say. Izuku blinked. Healing fast. He hadn't noticed anything dramatic, but now that he thought about it, the dull ache from earlier had lessened quite a bit. Must have been the adrenaline, he mumbled, trying to hide his unease. The nurse chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe you're just lucky. She glanced at the chart again. Wait, what is my quirk? He asked, looking at the nurse. She looks back at him and shrugs. From what the scans say, it enhances your body's cells in many ways. But I never came up as a quirk, so it means that the machine is broken or something. But, yeah, you can be let out in a few hours. Plus, where you got shot in the arm is healing nicely, she said, walking over to him. The nurse gently peeled back the bandages on Izuku's arm, revealing smooth, pink skin beneath, healed far more than it had any right to be after just a day. A faint, pale line was the only evidence that he'd been shot there at all. Izuku stared at it in disbelief, barely hearing the nurse's next words as his thoughts churned. I'll be back in a bit with your discharge papers, she said kindly. Just buzz if you need anything, okay? Izuku nodded absently. Yeah, okay, thank you. She gave him a quick smile before heading out, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Izuku leaned back against the pillows, eyes drifting to his arm. He flexed his fingers slowly. No pain, no stiffness. Even the bruises on his side and shoulder, once deep and dark, had faded into dull yellow blotches. There was no way this was normal. Even with minor quirks that enhanced healing, it didn't happen this fast. Not without some stimulation. 3 hours later, Izuku walked out of the hospital and took a deep breath. He still had a few scrapes on his face, and the wound on his arm wasn't fully healed, but that would come with time. It has been a crazy 24 hours. He wondered how he was going to be able to talk to the Joestars, or his ancestors anyway. He pulled out his phone and decided to call Toki to tell him the good news. At least the store wasn't damaged too much in the whole thing with the villain. He wondered if he had visited him or not, but then again, he had priorities as an owner to help fix the store and talk to the police about what happened. It rang once, then twice, before Toki's voice finally crackled through the phone. "Yo, kid, you alive?" Izuku chuckled softly at Toki's blunt greeting, a familiar warmth bubbling in his chest. "Yeah, I'm alive, barely. Just got out of the hospital." "That's good," he said, grunting as it sounded like he lifted something off the ground. "I heard something from a little bird, well, from a little dragon, more specifically," said Toki calmly. "That she would be giving you a monthly check so that you don't have to work anymore." Izuku sighed, knowing that this was a conversation that was not going to be avoided. "Yeah, she did. I am grateful for it, but I still want to help you all with that," he said, getting into a cab. Toki sighed. "Listen, kid. You are someone who has a huge heart. Biggest I have ever seen, in fact, and with all of the circumstances you have had and the situations that you have been through at this point, like, with you being an orphan, I am surprised you still do have a big heart, but you have to remember, you are 13 years old, not 23 years old. You deserve the chance to be a kid. Go have fun, mess around, screw up, learn from that, learn from a book. The list goes on, and I think this is a great thing for you. A lot of shit has happened to you, kid, and this is a good start for you." Izuku nodded quietly as the words settled in. The weight of what Toki was saying felt heavier than he'd expected, and it tugged at his heart in a way he hadn't anticipated. For as long as he could remember, he'd been forced to grow up too quickly. His life, marked by loneliness and hardship, had never really allowed him to just be a kid. The idea of not having to worry about money, about survival, about work, it felt surreal. But even with all the opportunities now in front of him, he couldn't shake the guilt that twisted in his stomach. He hadn't earned it, hadn't done anything to deserve it. "I know, Toki," he said softly, his voice a little tight. "But it just feels wrong not to contribute, you know. I'm not some helpless child. I can help, I can make a difference." Toki's laugh came through the phone, low and rich with understanding. "Kid, nobody's saying you're helpless. Far from it, but what I'm saying is, you've already been through so much. Hell, you've been doing so much without even realizing it. You've got potential, Izuku. More than most, even if you don't see it. You've got people who care about you now," Yuki's offer. "That's her way of showing you that people believe in you. Let it happen. Trust that you deserve it. And maybe, just maybe, you can actually enjoy being a kid for once. You've got a future ahead of you, kid. Don't waste it by stressing over the past." Izuku fell silent, mulling over Toki's words. It was hard to let go of the constant drive to prove himself, to show everyone that he was worth something. But something about Toki's voice, steady and kind, made the idea of trusting in himself, and others, seem a little less daunting. "You really think I can be a hero, huh?" Izuku asked, almost to himself. "Even with all the mess I've been through?" Toki was quiet for a beat before he answered, and when he did, it was with absolute certainty. "Kid, you've got the heart of a hero. And if you've got that, then nothing else matters. We all have our demons, but the true heroes are the ones who keep going, even when they're not sure they can. You've already done more than most would have ever imagined. That's why you're gonna be a great hero. Don't forget it." I think I understand," Izuku replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Maybe it's okay to let others help sometimes. Maybe I do deserve a break." "Damn right, you do," Toki's voice was full of warmth now. "Now, go have a good rest and I'll send you your last check. And when you're ready to start figuring out your quirk, then go and make a name for yourself as a hero. Go train and go do stuff other kids would do, and please attempt to make some friends," he said, grunting. Izuku let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The cab rumbled gently beneath him, the city blurring past outside the window. Toki's words lingered in his head, echoing louder than the honking horns and distant chatter of pedestrians. Go train. Go do stuff other kids would do. Try to make some friends. Friends. It had been a long time since Izuku had thought about that word with anything but a vague ache in his chest. He'd been alone for so long, it had become second nature. And yet, the idea didn't seem as impossible as it used to. Not anymore. Thanks, Toki, he said, voice quiet but genuine. Really, for everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Toki grunted again. Yeah, just don't get all sappy on me now. Go do something fun, and eat something that doesn't come out of a vending machine. Izuku chuckled. I'll try. He hung up, slipping the phone into his pocket as the cab pulled up to the curb near his neighborhood. He paid the driver and stepped out, the breeze cool against his face. The sky above was scattered with clouds, streaks of orange and gold stretching through the air as the sun dipped lower. It was a peaceful moment, one of those quiet transitions between day and night where everything felt softer somehow. Lighter. As he walked the short distance to his apartment, he noticed how the world felt different now. Sharper, maybe, more connected. The breath techniques were still echoing in his chest, his rhythm slow and purposeful. Even the hum beneath his skin, the one he'd first noticed in the hospital, remained, like a low flame burning just beneath the surface. Hammon. The word itself felt ancient, but not foreign. It was a part of him now. As he walked down the hallway, there was a man with long black hair and bandage-like things around his neck sitting outside the door of his apartment. The light flickered slightly as Izuku walked down to his door and looked at the man. "Can I help you, sir?" asked Izuku calmly. The man didn't stand up. He didn't even look fazed by Izuku's cautious tone. He just held out the envelope, a bit crumpled, like it had been through several pockets before landing in his hand. "Are you the Midoriya that Yukio told me about?" he asked flatly. Izuku blinked. The man's tired-looking eyes, half hidden behind his unkempt black hair, stared at him with the intensity of someone who hadn't slept in a few days, and didn't care. The scarf around his neck looked odd. Like it was made for more than just fashion. There was something about him that put Izuku slightly on edge, but not in a threatening way. More like a sense of weight. Like this man had seen too much and carried even more. Yeah, that's me," Izuku said, his voice cautious but polite. "You're here because of Yukio." The man nodded once. "She asked me to check in on you. Said you were tough but stubborn." Sounded familiar. He extended the envelope more insistently, and Izuku finally stepped forward to take it. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" Izuku asked, not rudely, just honestly. He had no idea who this man was. The man didn't answer right away. He stood, finally, rising to his full height with a slight roll of his shoulders. He looked down at Izuku with a calculating expression, then sighed like the question had taken more effort than it should have. "Eraserhead," he said. "Pro hero. Real name's Shota Aizawa." Izuku's eyes widened slightly. He had heard the name once or twice. A low-profile underground hero who worked in the shadows, known for capturing villains without flashy moves or public displays. He wasn't one of the top-ranked heroes, but those who knew heroes respected the hell out of him. "Oh," Izuku breathed, the name clicking into place. "Right, I think I've seen your name in a few articles." Aizawa gave him a flat look. "Don't read too much into them. Most of them get it wrong." "Right, sorry." A silence stretched between them for a moment. "Well, regardless, here is your check. Have a good day," said Eraserhead, walking down the hallway. Izuku turns to him and says, "Thank you, sir." "Yeah, sure, kid," he said, turning the corner as Izuku stepped into his small apartment. Izuku closed the door behind him with a soft click, the envelope still in his hand. Quiet settled back around him, and he stood there for a moment in the fading light, listening to the silence as if expecting something else to follow Aizawa's sudden appearance. Aizawa walked out of the run-down apartment and sighed as he pulled out his phone and called Yukio. "Hello," she answered. "Yukio, this is Eraserhead. I dropped off the check for him, and I will say, you were right when you said he is interesting, and it is a good thing you didn't tell the commission about him. I'll do as you said. I'll watch from the shadows to keep an eye on him for a while. Looks like he needs to if he lives in a place like this," he said, passing a crosswalk. Yukio's voice on the other end was calm, but there was a slight edge of concern beneath her usual professionalism. "Thank you, Aizawa. I knew you'd understand once you saw him in person. He's not like the others. He's not just another potential recruit or trainee. That kid's been through too much already, but there's still this core inside him. It's unshaken. Even with all that's happened. Izawa crossed the street, weaving through a few late commuters and glancing up at the sky beginning to fade into twilight. Yeah, I saw it, he said simply. He's been hurt. Bad, but he's not broken. Not yet. The cracks are there, though. Deep ones. It won't take much for him to fall through if we're not careful. I know, Yukio said softly. That's why I asked you. You're one of the only people I trust to see people as they are, not what the media or the commission wants them to be. Izawa gave a tired grunt of agreement. The commission would have chewed him up and spat him out, quirks or no quirks. And from what I've seen so far, the kid doesn't even fully know what he has yet. No, Yukio confirmed, he's only scratched the surface. The energy in him, it's not like anything I've felt before. It's not flashy or violent like most quirks. It's controlled, like it was waiting for someone who knew how to listen. Izawa's eyes narrowed slightly as he stopped near a convenience store. You think it's a mutation quirk that went unnoticed? I'm not sure. Maybe it is, she admitted. The hospital reports were vague. His vitals were unusual, but nothing the doctors could explain with standard medical science. Izawa rubbed his temple. That's just what we need. More mystery. The kids already have enough trauma for 3 lifetimes. We throw in a forgotten spiritual quirk to make it more interesting. But, like I said, I will let you go, and I will watch him a couple of times a week, he said, approaching his vehicle. Izawa unlocked his car with a soft beep, slipping into the driver's seat with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The door shut with a quiet thunk, and for a moment, he just sat there, phone still in hand, letting Yukio's last words echo in his ear. Thanks, she said. That's all I can ask. Just make sure he doesn't get lost. He's got potential, but more than that, he's got a heart. The kind we can't afford to lose. Izawa didn't respond right away. His eyes tracked the quiet street before him, watching a stray cat leap onto a dumpster and vanish into the alley behind it. Everything was still, peaceful, even. Yeah, he murmured at last. I'll make sure. He hung up and placed the phone on the passenger seat, then rested his hands on the steering wheel. Midoriya Izuku, a kid with strange energy, haunted eyes, and a spine stronger than it should be after everything he'd endured. He didn't quite understand the boy's deal yet, what exactly Yukio had seen in him, but he'd been around long enough to trust his instincts, and right now, they were whispering the same thing she had said, keep him close. Watch over him, quietly. The engine hummed to life with a low growl, and Izawa pulled into traffic, merging into the slow flow of early evening commuters. He had a patrol later tonight, but for now, he'd take a quick detour, swing by the school, check on a few files, maybe dig a little deeper into Midoriya's medical history. The name wasn't on any recent rosters, which was odd considering his age. No UA, no Shiketsu, not even the smaller hero prep schools. Just nothing, as if he'd slipped through the cracks. Then again, he was labeled as quirkless, and that would change, so there was that. That's what worries me most, Izawa thought grimly. The ones who fall through the cracks are always the ones the world forgets. And they're the ones who bleed the most quietly. I think that we caught it in time. With Izuku, he was standing in the mirror, shirtless, as he was trying to figure out how to get back to meet his ancestors. He was staring at his star-shaped birthmark intently and sighed. He would just go to sleep and see what would happen. Besides, he had about 2 years before the UA entrance exam. He had to rush and catch up with everyone else. He was learning to crawl while everyone else was doing a sprint. But, for now, he would just relax and see what happens. Izuku stepped away from the mirror and walked to the edge of his futon, letting his fingers brush against the worn fabric of the blanket. The room was small, barely enough space to stretch out without bumping into something. A few boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, remnants of his old life, one filled with medical records, half-used notebooks, and a sketchpad that had seen better days. But right now, none of that mattered. He closed his eyes as he let sleep take him. The next day, it honestly felt weird to Izuku that he no longer had a job. It was weird that he didn't have to rush around anymore, and he could do what he wanted, but he needed to figure out how to train with Hammon. He made his way into the school and into the classroom, and Bakugo stomped over to his desk as he sat down casually. Deku, Where the hell were you yesterday? He said, yelling at him. I was attacked by a villain while being at the convenience store and sent to the hospital, and was injured pretty badly, he said, showing him the mark under his bandaged arm and his still somewhat bruised face. Bakugo clicked his tongue and leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the mark under the bandage with mild suspicion. The usual fire in his voice simmered, but didn't boil over. TCH, you're still standing, so it couldn't have been that bad. Izuku gave a tired chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. I guess that's one way to look at it. The bell rang, cutting off the exchange. Their teacher strolled in moments later, and the morning announcements began. Izuku tried to focus, jotting down notes, but his thoughts were miles away, still lingering on the warmth he'd felt the night before, the ancestors watching him, the strange clarity that had settled into his bones. Every time he took a deep breath, he felt it again. Faint, but real, like a spark just under his skin, waiting. He needed training in something structured. Meditation was fine, but it wasn't enough. And he had no idea how to shape or use the energy he felt. He scribbled a few thoughts in the margins of his notebook between classes. Controlled breathing, movement, focused intention, visualization, maybe stance training. Muscle control. He needed advice from Jonathan and Joseph because they said they were users of Hammon, and the only things that he knew at this second were that when he breathed in, he could feel the power inside of him. He would just have to hope he would meet them all again soon, because he had several questions. He turned to a fresh page in his notebook and began jotting down more questions, letting his thoughts spill out as they formed. Can Hammon be used to heal others or himself? Does it grow stronger with physical training or only with breathing control? Can it enhance speed or strength like a quirk would? How did Jonathan and Joseph learn to use it so well? Is there a limit to it? He slowly went to his left shoulder, rubbing his birthmark slowly as he thought about everyone he met. They were all different but similar, if that made sense. He knew they had different personalities and wills, but something that they all had in common was to help and stop evil. From what he could tell, anyway. The rest of the day went by quietly, but he could tell Bakugo kept glaring at him. He chuckled to himself as he walked down the hallway. Toki told him to make friends, but the majority of the school didn't like him in the least bit. Hell, even the teachers tried to avoid him. It was whatever, he could worry later about that. He was walking back to his apartment when he heard a voice in his head. Oi, Izuku, this is Joseph. Just curious, but did we show you how to come and meet us as you please? He asked, hoping as if he was about to say yes. Izuku blinked and chuckled to himself as he walked up to his apartment. He replied to Joseph in his head. No, you didn't. Aw, son of a bitch. Alright, so do this when sitting down, but you need to press the birthmark and think of us, but also the feeling of the path you are on. The path of energy of Hammon and the path to be a hero, he said to him with a slight chuckle at the end. It sounds weird, I know. But it's not just about thought, it's about intent. You've gotta mean it, like calling out to us across time with your soul. Izuku locked the door behind him, dropped his bag by the wall, and moved to the center of the room. The air was quiet, soft wind outside, distant hum of city life, and for a moment, he just stood there, hands hovering over the birthmark on his shoulder. His thoughts tumbled through the day. Bakugo's half-hearted concern, the spark under his skin, the questions clawing at his brain, and now this voice, Joseph Joestar, casual and chaotic, but strangely comforting. He sat cross-legged on the worn floor, placed his fingertips gently on the star-shaped mark, and closed his eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. He focused on the warmth inside him, the tiny flare that seemed to live just behind every inhale. He thought about the dreamscape he'd visited before, the Golden Valley, the watchful ancestors, the overwhelming sensation that he belonged there. He concentrated on that path Joseph had mentioned, the path of energy, of Hammon. But not just power, of purpose. The desire to protect, to fight evil, to stand even when the world tried to knock him down again and again. I want to walk this path, Izuku whispered under his breath. Show me how. The air around him shivered. Suddenly, the room vanished. Not violently. No wind, no light show, no disorienting pull. It was more like slipping between two breaths. One blink he was in his apartment, the next, standing on a narrow bridge of stone that stretched across a vast canyon of golden mist. At the far end stood several figures, cloaked in light and shadow. He recognized two of them instantly. "Hey, it worked," Joseph shouted, waving both hands above his head. He wore that same grin from before, cocky and carefree. "See, I told you it'd work." Eventually. Next to him stood Jonathan, serene as ever, his impeccable posture, arms folded behind his back. "Izuku," Jonathan greeted with a nod. "You've come again. That is good." Izuku stumbled forward a bit, amazed. I did it." "Of course you did, but you did need to think about the path of being a hero. You just needed to press it and think of any of us," he said, laughing, gesturing to all 6 of them. "I was just fucking with you." Jotaro sighs, hopping down from his stool, walking over. "You get used to Gramps' antics," he said. "All right, back to the main topic," said Jonathan, interrupting them. "We said that we would help, and now, time to understand the basics of Hamon and how to train with it to make it strong," he said, walking him over to a chair and desk that somehow appeared. Jonathan placed a firm, steady hand on Izuku's shoulder and guided him gently toward the chair, which seemed carved from the same golden stone as the bridge they stood on. As Izuku sat down, a low hum of energy vibrated through the air, a rhythm that pulsed in time with his breathing. It was like the entire realm responded to his intent. Joseph leaned lazily against a nearby pillar, one leg crossed over the other, his arms behind his head, a smirk on his face. Off to the side, Jotaro stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Josuke lounged on a wide rock, spinning a coin between his fingers, while Giorno sat cross-legged, composed and quietly observant. Jolin leaned back with her arms behind her, one foot tapping in rhythm with the hum of energy in the air. Jonathan, ever composed, stepped forward. "Izuku, Hamon, also called Ripple, is a power that originates from the energy of the sun. It flows through the body like a current, amplified by proper breathing. This is the foundation, but more than that, it's a harmony between your body, spirit, and purpose." Izuku nodded slowly, trying to take it all in. "So, it's not just physical training." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "It's discipline of mind, clarity of intent, and control of breath. Your body is the conduit, but your will is the spark." Jonathan clasped his hands behind his back, his voice calm and sure, the golden mist curling gently around them like living breath. "Let's begin with the essence," he said. "Hamon, or the ripple, is life energy conducted through the bloodstream, produced through a controlled breathing technique that mirrors the rhythm of the sun itself. It may seem simple, but it is not easy." Joseph chimed in. "Basically, you're turning your body into a solar battery. You breathe, you focus, and bam! You've got a surge of sunlight riding your bloodstream. It's like if photosynthesis and martial arts had a badass love child." Jonathan gave him a look, but didn't disagree. Joseph looked a bit sheepish and sighed. "My bad. I may have lived over 100 years, but I still have my old tendencies from when I was a kid." "My fault," he said as Jonathan continued. "Hamon grants several abilities," Jonathan continued. "Let us break them down so you understand what is possible and what must be earned." He raised a hand, and an arc of golden energy sparked along his arm, dancing like sunlight over water. First, physical enhancement. When used properly, Hamon enhances your body's natural strength, speed, and reflexes. Not to the level of certain quirks, perhaps, but enough to rival them when trained fully. You'll be faster, hit harder, jump higher. But it is not a constant buff, it must flow in rhythm with your breath. "But," Jonathan added, "there is something different." Joseph stepped in now, his tone more serious, though still carrying that familiar boyish undertone. "Right, and that's where things get interesting. See, kid, Hamon isn't exactly what it used to be. Not entirely. It's evolved, changed." Izuku blinked. "Changed? How?" Joseph rubbed the back of his head, looking over at Jonathan, who gave him a nod to continue. "Back in our time, Hamon was pure solar energy. Straight up life force, right? Run it through metal, water, even leaves if you've got enough finesse. But now it's got a weird edge to it. A different resonance." Jotaro grunted in agreement. "Yeah, I felt it too. Now, while it still can do all of those things, here's what we found, the first time you channeled it, Izuku. It wasn't just Hamon. It had, wait, Like a deeper chord in a song. Not corrupted. Just different. Giorno, ever silent and calculating, finally spoke up. It's like Hammond has attuned to this world differently. It's adapting. Perhaps it's due to the presence of quirks, this world's dominant life energy system. Hammond may be adjusting to harmonize with it. Joseph snapped his fingers. Exactly. We're not saying it's dangerous or unstable. But as my grandpa always said, he suddenly puffed up and dropped into a surprisingly accurate impression of Jonathan. The sun does not waver, but even the sun casts new light in foreign skies. He coughed and grinned. Kinda poetic, huh? Izuku couldn't help but laugh softly. So, what does that mean for me? It means, Joseph said, growing more serious again, we'll be watching. Monitoring. Guiding. Whatever this new ripple is shaping into, you're the first one truly wielding it here. And hey, don't freak out, it's not life-threatening or unstable. Just new. So, we take it slow, keep tabs, and if something changes, we adapt. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. You carry potential that could redefine what Hammond becomes in this era. But first, you must understand it as it was, its roots. From there, your branch may grow as it needs. Izuku nodded, heart pounding with a mix of awe and responsibility. I'll do my best. You'd better. Jolin smirked from the back, arms crossed. We're putting a lot of time into you, nerd. Anyway, Joseph continued, pointing a thumb at himself, back to the juicy bits. Second, healing. Hammond ain't just about kicking ass with sun punches. It can mend wounds, too. Not instantly like some quirks, but closely. You've got control. That's why you are healing a hell of a lot faster than normal people do. You were unconsciously healing yourself, lying in that hospital bed while practicing your breathing. That's one of the things we said about how Hammond in this world is changing, Joseph said, pointing at him. Wait, really? Asked Izuku. Yes, really, but that is not the only thing. Hammond can allow you to heal yourself, and you can heal others, too, he said, with Jotaro cutting Josuke. Dude, come on, said Josuke, looking at the now fresh cut. Oh, quit whining, you are the example, Jotaro said, walking away. Jonathan walked over to Josuke and placed a hand on the clearly bleeding area. Jonathan exhaled slowly as the golden hue formed around him. Once done, the wound was healed without a trace. Josuke winced for a moment, but as Jonathan's golden energy flowed through him, the pain vanished. The bleeding stopped, and the fresh cut was gone as if it had never existed in the first place. His skin was smooth, unmarked. See, that's the power of Hammond in action. It's not instant like quirks, but it's incredibly effective and precise, Jonathan said, stepping back with a satisfied nod. The healing process may take time, but with focus and training, you'll be able to heal yourself and others. It's the ebb and flow of life energy that brings the body back to balance. That is amazing, he said with awe. Third, utility and versatility. All right, Izuku, said Joseph, pushing off the pillar with a theatrical twirl of his finger. Time for the real fun, how to use Hammond in ways that aren't just punches and patch-ups. This is where creativity starts to matter. He flicked his wrist, and a long string of silver wire glinted in his hand. A quick breath, a pulse of golden energy, and the wire stiffened like a blade, crackling with the familiar shimmer of Hammond. He cracked it like a whip, the sound echoing across the bridge of mist. Hammond can travel through anything that conducts it, liquids, metal, plants, even cloth. You've got a scarf. You can use it. A metal pole, even better. Hello, I once used spaghetti. No, seriously, he added when Izuku blinked in disbelief. I did it to my friend Caesar once. He never let me live it down. Think of Hammond as water under pressure, Jonathan interjected. It can be focused into precise strikes or allowed to flow in a continuous stream. If you're creative, it can enhance tools, disable enemies, or even interact with the environment, stun machines, move objects, illuminate paths. Huh, that's awesome, said Izuku, smiling. Hell yeah, it is, but it's time for the last one. Fourth, growth and potential. You may have just unlocked Hammond now, but it will only continue to grow from here on out. The more you train, the better you will be, and the stronger it becomes. Hell, we may be spirits, but we still train with Hammond, said Joseph. Joseph crossed his arms with a smirk. We may not have flesh and blood anymore, but Hammon is tied to the spirit. That means even after death, as long as our will persists, we can keep improving. You think we're giving you lectures just to pass time in the afterlife? Jonathan chuckled gently. He means to say that Hammon is a reflection of your willpower and life force. As long as you grow as a person, so too will your ripple strengthen. Right, said Joseph, nodding. Hammon's tied to your breath, your rhythm, and ultimately your resolve. The stronger your heart, the stronger your ripple. Jolin tilted her head. So, in a way, it's kind of like a stand. Just less punchy and sunnier. Izuku's eyes sparkled. So, it's infinite. It keeps growing as I do. Exactly, Jonathan said, his voice full of warmth. But do not mistake that for ease. Growth demands effort, patience, and discipline. Hammon responds to life itself. It resonates with your emotions, your control, your understanding of your own spirit. Joseph stepped forward again, hands animated. Let me paint it out for you. Have you ever heard about someone holding their breath underwater for 10 minutes? Or people who can slow their heartbeat at will? That's what advanced Hammon users train for. Total synchronicity between mind, body, and breath. You become a living conduit for life energy. Add to that, said Giorno, this new resonance, the unknown layer Hammon has taken on here in your world. It means your ceiling may be even higher than ours ever was. Jotaro nodded slowly. You're not just inheriting the old. You're evolving it. That makes you both student and pioneer. Holy shit, said Izuku looking at his arms. Jotaro sighed, putting a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, it's a lot. But I think that would about cover it from those two. You should go and start training Izuku. You can only be here for so long, from what we can tell. But the more you train, the stronger your connection will grow with us, and the longer you can be here, said Jonathan calmly. Wait, before I leave, what about those 3 shadowy guys still in the corner? Said Izuku, pointing to them. Jotaro walked over to them as well as Josuke, and they pulled back their shoulders near their shoulders. They are more Joestars, or have Joestar blood, said Josuke, showing him a faint glow of the birthmark they all had. Jotaro sighed, looking them over once more. We don't know who these 3 are, but they have Joestar blood, but kid, you are starting to fade in and out now. We will all have to catch you later. Izuku blinked as his vision started to shimmer around the edges. The golden light that bathed the mist-covered space dimmed slightly, as if a curtain was slowly being pulled shut. He looked down at his hands and saw them flickering, like a weak flame trying to hold on against the wind. I'm fading, he asked, panic creeping into his voice. Jonathan stepped forward quickly, his calm and steady presence anchoring Izuku in that moment. Yes, your physical body is waking from the calmness, and the tether that brought you here is shifting, but that is fine. Make sure to train your lungs, train your body, train your mind, train your heart, and train your spirit. We will be here when the time comes to meet again. Just train your body slowly over time and we will discuss the next steps once you have built it up to some degree. Izuku nodded shakily, the weight of the experience settling into his chest like a fire trying to burn steadily against a rising wind. His eyes lingered on each of the Joestars, their faces now solemn, proud, and strangely distant, as if they too were fading slightly with him. I won't let this go to waste, he promised, his voice barely a whisper as the mist began to creep up around his ankles. I'll train, I'll get stronger. We know you will, Joseph grinned, giving him a thumbs up. Just don't forget to breathe properly. You mess that up, and you'll pass out faster than I can say, Rip Caesar. Focus on rhythm, added Jonathan gently, his golden aura pulsing softly with every word. Not just in breathing, but in all things. Every battle, every movement, every emotion, it all flows. Learn to feel the pulse of life within and around you. Stand tall, kid, Jotaro said. You're carrying more than a legacy. You're shaping the future of it. Izuku looked at them, feeling an ache in his heart. Not sadness, exactly, but a longing, a desire to stay a little longer, to keep learning from these legends. But his vision was cracking now, like glass under pressure, lines of shimmering distortion webbing through the misty world. The 3 shadowy figures in the distance hadn't moved, but he saw their outlines flicker slightly, as though reacting to his departure. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, raised a hand ever so slightly, as if waving goodbye. Who are they? Izuku opened his eyes and looked around his tiny apartment, and sighed. Time to get to work. The next day, Izuku weighed himself to see what he had to work with. He was skinny, but it was time to see how skinny he was. He stepped off the scale and wrote down the number. He was 6 feet tall and 152 pounds. Damn, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I need muscle. I get I am 13 and stuff, but damn, do I look like a twig right now, he said, doing a once-over. Whatever, time for my first run, he said to himself, putting on a sweatshirt and sweatpants. It was 7:02 a.m. on a Saturday. Izuku laced up his old sneakers, worn from time and stress, but still hanging in there. He took one last look at himself in the mirror by the door. Pale skin, wiry limbs, a messy mop of green hair, and eyes still haunted by the glow of that misty golden place. A Joestar legacy now rested in his lungs and bones, and all he had to show for it was 152 pounds of stringy determination. Damn, he muttered again. Whatever. Time to stop looking and start doing. He stepped out into the cool morning. The streets of Musudafu were quiet at this hour, with only a few joggers out and a shopkeeper unlocking the shutters to their corner bakery. The air had a slight bite, but it was clean, and each breath stung in a way that reminded Izuku he was alive. His lungs drew in the morning, and he remembered Jonathan's voice. Train your lungs, your body, your mind, your heart, and your spirit. Right, he whispered, one breath at a time. He took off running. Not sprinting, but steady. Rhythm. Joseph had said rhythm was everything. At first, Izuku focused only on his breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady. Controlled. He could feel how ragged it was already. He'd barely gone a block, and his chest was tightening. You're pathetic, he said to himself. But that's why you're doing this. He took a look around to see lots of posters and graffiti talking about heteromorphs. He frowned. It was, one of the sadder parts of quirk society was the discrimination many of them faced. He lived in the shady parts of the city because of the rent, or rather, the area with more heteromorphs, but he never had a run-in with criminals or anything like that. Not yet anyone. It wasn't. After 10 more minutes, Izuku stopped at the halfway mark. He was panting heavily now as he looked at the cityscape around him. It was a nice area despite the tall buildings. Oi, kid, said a gruff voice. Izuku controlled his breathing and turned slightly to see a middle-aged man smoking a cigarette. He was a heteromorph. He had a wolf-like appearance, and he had a scar running down the side of his face. Izuku didn't flinch but rather wiped the sweat off his face. The man narrowed his golden eyes as smoke curled from his lips. You look like you're about to pass out. First run. Izuku gave a shaky nod, still catching his breath. Yeah, just started training. Gotta build up my lungs and stamina. The wolf-like man grunted, flicking ash from his cigarette. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most kids your age are holed up indoors, wasting time on nonsense. You look like you're running from something, or toward it. Izuku looked at the sidewalk for a second, then back at the man. Maybe both. Trying to get stronger. I have big shoes to fill. That got a short laugh from the man, rough and low like gravel. Big shoes, huh, we all do. But most people don't realize their feet are still growing. A quiet silence grew between them as Izuku took off his shoe to get rid of that annoying rock that had been bothering him for a while. This is gonna sound awkward, kid, but you got a thing against heteromorphs. No offense, but most people like you stay away from here because of us. Just a simple fact. 56% of the neighborhood is heteromorphs after all, he asked honestly. Izuku put his shoe back on and looked at him, confused. No, why would I? The man studied him for a moment, smoke rising between them like a veil. You'd be surprised how many people don't need a reason. You grow up being told you're different, and that's all it takes. Some people cross the street when they see someone like me coming. Others just call you names. But worse are the ones who smile to your face and still see you as something less. He tapped the end of his cigarette on the metal railing beside them. So, when I see someone like you running through our neighborhood, I tend to ask. Izuku furrowed his brow. I didn't even realize this was considered a heteromorph neighborhood until I started paying attention to the signs. I just live here because it's what I can afford. Rent's low, and honestly, no one's ever given me a problem. The man gave a short, dry chuckle. That's 'cause you're polite. You don't flinch when we talk. You didn't run when I said, oi. That's more than I can say for most. Izuku offered a tired but honest smile. I think it's messed up. People are people. Powers or appearances don't make someone better or worse. His breath was finally slowing, the tightness in his chest easing. I wanna be a hero. Not just someone who saves people from villains, but someone who makes things better, fairer. The man took a long drag on his cigarette and let the silence stretch for a few moments. Finally, he muttered, if that's true, then don't lose that fire. The world's full of people ready to stomp it out. Izuku nodded, then tilted his head. You a pro hero or something? The man shook his head. Nah, used to be military, vigilante work for a while. Nothing official. These days I just make sure the younger ones in the area don't get into too much trouble. I watch the streets. You could say I'm semi-retired. He raised his clawed hand in mock salute. Name's Ginru. Izuku, he replied, extending his hand. Ginru looked at it, then took it, his claws careful not to press too hard. Keep running, Izuku. Train hard. You're not the first kid I've seen who thinks he can change the world. He gave a half smile. Maybe you'll be the first to actually pull it off. Izuku grinned. I won't stop trying. Thanks, Ginru. The older man waved him off and turned, disappearing down an alleyway like mist. Izuku watched him go, feeling a strange warmth settle in his chest. The run back home was slower. His legs ached, and his sweat chilled quickly in the wind. But there was a new kind of weight in his stride, purpose. As he reached his apartment again, he unlocked the door and stumbled inside, half collapsing onto the floor. His legs were jelly, and his lungs burned like fire. But he was smiling. He lay there for a while, breathing deeply, focusing on the rhythm Joseph talked about. In through the nose, out through the mouth, even. Controlled. Life energy flows with intention, he remembered Jonathan saying. The start was hard, but keeping consistent would be harder. He got some breakfast together and wondered what the hell he could do next. You don't just throw yourself hard into something otherwise, you hurt yourself more than help. Oi, Earth to Izuku, said Jotaro, trying to get his attention. Oh yeah, what's up? He said out loud to no one in particular. You idiot, talk to us in your head. If you were in public, you would have looked like a crazy person, he said, annoyed. Oh, right, sorry, he said, embarrassed, putting a hand to his face. Anyway, I will be the one to tell you to try to study and learn about a lot of different subjects because it will help. Jonathan said train your mind, and that means learning and discipline. For example, I may look like all muscles and arrogant from time to time, but I got a PhD in marine biology. Izuku blinked. A PhD. He sat up straighter, reaching for a bowl of cereal as he processed that information. Jotaro, you're serious? He asked internally, lifting a spoonful to his mouth. Dead serious, Jotaro replied. People assume strength only comes from brawling and punching harder than the next guy. But real strength, lasting strength, comes from knowledge, too. You can't beat a smarter enemy if you're not willing to learn. Huh, then I'll have to do that too, but first I need actual food to get stronger. Now that I get a monthly stipend, I can afford a lot more stuff compared to that minimum wage job. Jotaro scoffed, smart idea. I can tell you get your intelligence from me. Joseph scoffed in the background. And where did you get yours from then, dear grandson? He said, smiling at him. Shut up, old man. Anyway, Izuku, I thought I would tell you that. Now I need to show the old man what's up. Bye, he said, cutting off the connection to him. Izuku chuckled to himself. 6 people with very different personalities. But they were good people, from what he could tell. 7 hours later. All right, that should be good in terms of groceries. For a few days anyway, he said, holding a few bags in his hand. It was simple, but it contained veggies, meats, and fruits. The streets weren't empty, but they weren't busy either. This part of town tended to grow quiet once the workday ended. The buildings were older, some with cracked windows or faded paint, but the people here looked out for one another. At least, that's what Ginru had said. Still, as Izuku turned the corner onto a narrower sidewalk, the air felt a bit different. Tense. He saw them just ahead. 4 guys loitering under a flickering streetlight. One was leaning against the brick wall of a closed pawn shop, arms crossed, his skin a rough, scaly brown like a crocodile's. Another had hair like porcupine quills and a set of tusks jutting from his bottom jaw. The other 2 were more human-looking but had minor mutation, sharp eyes, thick forearms, and strange skin tones. They were laughing at something, but the moment they saw Izuku, they quieted down. Eyes turned toward him. Izuku didn't break his stride. "TCH, look at this fucker right here living in our neighborhood," said the croc. Izuku sighed. He just wanted to get his groceries to his apartment. Izuku kept walking, even as his stomach sank slightly. He didn't flinch, didn't glare, didn't pick up his pace, but he didn't slow down either. Just steady steps forward, plastic grocery bags swaying slightly with each stride. He could feel their eyes tracking him like a predator sizing up prey. Not out of immediate threat, no, this was more territorial. Defensive, suspicious, and maybe, just maybe, bored. Porcupine Quills spoke next, his voice edged with derision. "Got himself a good haircut and fresh groceries. Bet he thinks he's better than us." Izuku stopped a few paces ahead of them and turned, keeping his posture relaxed. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to get home." The croc pushed off the wall slowly, heavy boots scraping the sidewalk. "That's so. You talk politely. That's nice. Makes it sound like you care." "I do," Izuku said simply. "I'm not here to cause trouble." One of the more human-looking guys with dusky gray skin stepped forward now, cracking his knuckles. "You sound like a cop. All calm and respectable. You know how many of us got chased out of better neighborhoods 'cause we looked different?" "Too many," Izuku said. "That's messed up. I don't want that for anyone." His voice was even, sincere. He met their gazes, each of them. He didn't glare, didn't flinch. He just stood there with arms hanging loose at his sides, not clenched into fists. The 4th guy finally chimed in, the one who had been quietest so far, his arms folded across a bulky chest. "Then what are you doing here? Charity project? Some undercover hero experience thing? What? Did you come here to study us?" Izuku sighed softly and shook his head. "No, I'm broke. This is what I can afford. I'm training, trying to be stronger. That's all. No projects, no weird mission. Just a guy trying not to fall apart." The tension in the air didn't vanish, but it shifted. The croc stopped a few feet away, arms still relaxed at his sides. "Are you a student?" "Junior high student," he said calmly. 13 years old. The croc guy blinked, taken aback. 13, he repeated, almost in disbelief. The others glanced at each other, as if only now really seeing how young Izuku was. It was harder to peg with his steady demeanor and the quiet strength in his voice. "You serious?" Porcupine asked, stepping a little closer, his tusks catching the light. Izuku nodded. "Dead serious." The guy with the cracked knuckles let out a short laugh, not mocking, more surprised. "Damn, you've got more backbone than most grown men. You didn't even flinch." "Well, not everyone gets to live the life of the high and mighty," he said quietly, feeling the tension slowly die down. Porcupine scratched the side of his face, eyes narrowing slightly, but not in a threatening way, more contemplative now. "You really live around here? Like, actually live here?" "Yeah," Izuku replied, shifting the grocery bags in his grip. "Over in the building near the corner. 4th floor." The 4th guy, still silent with his arms crossed, finally nodded slightly, almost like he was confirming something for himself. "Huh, so you're not frontin'. You're just a broke kid trying to make it." "I guess that's one way to put it," Izuku said with a tired smile. The croc guy tilted his head. "Training, you said? Like, hero training?" "Yeah, not at a fancy school or anything yet. Just, out here, running, lifting, learning. Training my mind, body, everything. I want to be a hero someday, but I'm not there yet." Not even close. For a second, none of them said anything. The only sound was the soft buzz of the flickering streetlight overhead, its unstable glow casting odd shadows across their faces. Then Croc broke the silence with a low chuckle. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Most people your age would have turned around or bolted at the sight of us." "I thought about it," Izuku admitted. But that'd just make things worse, wouldn't it? Running means, you think someone's gonna hurt you. And if you act like someone's a monster, then eventually they'll start playing the part. The guy with the cracked knuckles gave a low whistle. Damn, philosophical, too. Alright, kid, you passed the vibe check, said the croc, looking at him. Get out of here before someone else who has worse manners than ours comes out, and sorry about earlier. Izuku nodded. Don't worry about it. Have a good night, guys. He turned and started walking again, the soft thump of his sneakers tapping a steady rhythm on the uneven pavement. The grocery bags rustled gently at his sides, one of the handles biting a little into his hand, but he ignored it. The air still felt charged, but not in the same way. It was no longer tense with hostility. Just watchful. Izuku stopped and turned around to the four men. And just some advice for you all. They straightened, not in aggression, but curiosity. His voice was calm, clear in the stillness. I understand that heteromorphs go through a lot out than anyone with quirks. Many of them are hurt in more ways than one, but don't assume someone who looks like me, he said, gesturing to himself, is going to hate you. You all do realize not everyone hates heteromorphs, right? Just know that, because I don't. The four men were silent for a moment. The croc guy, whose posture had shifted from confrontational to contemplative, tilted his head slightly, studying Izuku as if reevaluating everything he thought he knew. The others watched too, more thoughtful than defensive now. The guy with porcupine quills folded his arms, his expression unreadable, while the one with gray skin looked down at his feet, jaw tight, as if chewing over something difficult. Yeah, well, the croc muttered, glancing away for a second, you'd be surprised how often, not everyone, still feels like everyone, when you're on the receiving end. Izuku nodded. I get that. Or, I'm trying to. I know I can't pretend to know what it's like to walk in your shoes. But I also know I've been judged before I even opened my mouth. And that's something I do understand. Anyway, have a good night to you all. Stay safe. The silence that followed was heavy, not with threat, but with the weight of reflection. The kind that lingered in the air after something unexpectedly real cut through all the noise. The croc guy grunted, a quiet sound that could have been agreement or just acknowledgement. Izuku didn't press further. He gave them a final nod, turned, and resumed his walk. His legs carried him down the cracked sidewalk, past flickering streetlights and dented mailboxes, the weight of the grocery bags grounding him to the present moment. He'd gotten better at reading tension, better than he liked to admit. Situations like this didn't always end peacefully. In fact, they rarely did. But tonight, something shifted. He could feel it, even as he walked away. A softening. Not trust exactly, but maybe a beginning. Behind him, one of the guys, porcupine quills, muttered just loud enough to carry, kid's got a point. Yeah, came a slower response. It might have been the quiet guy, the one who had folded his arms and barely spoken. He's not like the others. You can tell. Their voices faded as Izuku rounded the corner. Izuku continued the walk to his apartment. As Izuku walked to the apartment, he realized how bad everyone could have it. Whether you were upper class, middle class, lower class, heteromorph, quirkless, or just an average person. Everyone could be pain. It made him want to push to be a hero for all. As he reached the apartment, he went up the stairs immediately. The elevator hadn't worked for months, so he took the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight. By the time he reached the 4th floor, his arms were sore and his breath shallow. Still, he didn't complain. He just shifted the bags again, fumbled with his key, and let himself into the small apartment. He set the bags down and sighed slightly. This was a start. It would be a slow one, but a start, nonetheless. 2 weeks later, 29 Mississippi, 30 Mississippi, 31 Mississippi, 32 Mississippi, Izuku gasped for air as he got his head out of the bucket of water he had in the bathroom. The bathroom was cracking slightly, but it still got the job done. Izuku panted as water droplets fell from his hair and face. He wrote down the results he had on the paper next to him. When you limit resources, you make do. It was simple, but it would work for now until he could get better and more effective means of training. He stood up and wiped himself down, checking the time. Ah, crap, school starts in 30 minutes, he said, rushing to get his things. He had forgotten about the time since he was training his lungs for the past hour. Izuku scrambled into his room, tossing aside the towel and grabbing the wrinkled school uniform hanging from a nail in the wall. He changed quickly, the practiced movements of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and snatched a protein bar from the counter on his way to the door. His shoes were still damp from the early morning jog, but there was no time to worry about that now. He slung his bag over one shoulder, double-checked that the stove was off, and bolted out of the apartment. The hallway echoed with the thud of his shoes against the floorboards as he rushed down the stairs. 4 flights of creaky steps didn't slow him down anymore, his body had adapted. His lungs still burned from the breath training, but that was the point. Push the limit, then break it. Repeat. It was time to see if Hammond could help him here. He hadn't practiced with Hammond itself all that much in the past couple of weeks because the others told him to focus on his body for the time being. Izuku breathed in and out slowly as he felt it flow through his body. By the time he hit the street, the sun was creeping higher in the sky, casting long shadows between the buildings. The city was waking up. Cars honking, doors slamming, someone yelling down the block. Izuku moved through it all like a ghost in motion, weaving between pedestrians and leaping over a tipped trash bin, his feet barely touching the ground. He was running slightly faster than if he hadn't activated Hammond. He turned the corner to Aldera Junior High and panted lightly, looking at his slightly cracked phone. 6 minutes to spare. Thank God, he said to himself, making his way down the hallway. He did feel slightly rejuvenated from Hammond, though. Granted, Hammond could heal himself faster than normal, so he felt less fatigued at the moment. He slipped into class just as the bell rang, sliding into his seat with a breath of relief. A few heads turned in his direction, some out of habit, others with a little curiosity. Izuku had been different lately. Quieter, more focused. People still bothered him or outright bullied him, but he just didn't care anymore. Now he never really did care, to an extent, but there was no point in wasting his energy on people who didn't matter. Not in the slightest. One of the major cons of this is that he didn't have any friends. Hours went by in the blink of an eye, and Izuku continued to go about his day like he normally would. He stretched his arms over his head and was stopped by Bakugo near the quieter parts of the school. "What the hell are you doing, nerd?" He grunted out. Walking," he said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Yeah, no shit, I mean what are you doing in general? I saw you were in the library a bit ago. Getting a bunch of books and shit," he said, crossing his arms. "Well, I went there to get books to read, yeah," he said, showing him the cover of one. "Why do you need the unnecessary number of books? You still trying to be a hero, Deku?" he said, growling slightly. "Well, yeah, obviously I am," he said, putting the book back in his backpack. "God damn it, you are quirkless. You can't be a hero," he said, glaring at him. Izuku looked at him calmly. "So, you think someone can't be a hero because they are quirkless?" Bakugo scoffed. "It's not about what I think, it's about reality. The world doesn't give a damn about your dreams if you don't have the power to back them up. You can't punch a villain into submission with hope and good intentions. So, if I got a random power all of a sudden, I could be a hero?" asked Izuku, crossing his arms. He hadn't told anybody about what happened with Hammond awakening from the fight in the convenience store. It wouldn't matter anyway if they thought he had a quirk. Bakugo scoffed again, more frustrated than before. "That's not the point. You're just being delusional. You think just because you read some books and do a couple of push-ups, you'll be standing next to All Might one day. Right, whatever you keep telling yourself to feel better and sleep at night," said Izuku, turning away from him and walking away. "Oh fucker, we aren't done talking," he said, punching his shoulder hard. Izuku stumbled forward slightly and turned around. Izuku rubbed his shoulder, wincing at the sharp sting. "Really, you're going to start hitting me now?" His voice was tired but steady, not rising to match Bakugo's usual volume. "You know, that just makes you look desperate." Bakugo glared at him, his chest heaving with anger, but there was something else flickering in his eyes, maybe frustration or confusion. "Desperate? Me? I'm not the one who's wasting time with dreams that'll never come true." Bakugo cocked his fist back and launched it at Izuku, hitting him in the face. Izuku wasn't expecting it, and he wished he hadn't let his guard down because that shouldn't have happened. Izuku staggered back from the force of the punch, his cheek throbbing and his vision momentarily blurring from the impact. He stumbled against the nearby lockers, catching himself before he could fall. A thin line of blood dripped from his lip, but he didn't retaliate. He simply stood there, head lowered, his breath slow and controlled as he fought to stay calm. Bakugo stood there, breathing heavily, his fist still clenched and trembling slightly. A few students nearby had heard the commotion and poked their heads around corners, curious but unwilling to get involved. I'll say it once again. You are quirkless and will never be a hero. Plain and simple. Damn, Deku, he said, growling, stomping away from him. As Bakugo's footsteps faded down the hallway, the weight of his words still hung in the air like smog, thick, poisonous, and impossible to ignore. Izuku stood still, the coppery tang of blood in his mouth mixing with the raw sting in his cheek. His fingers curled into fists at his side, but he didn't shake. Not anymore. He raised his head slowly, green eyes clear and sharp beneath the messy mop of wet hair that clung to his forehead. You hit me, and I'm still standing, he whispered to no one. You can scream all you want, Bakugo. I'm still here. He turned and walked down the hallway, ignoring the stares of the few students who had dared to watch. He didn't want their pity. He didn't need their validation. The sting in his cheek would fade. But the fire in his chest, it only grew hotter. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.